One is here. Meeting of the Select Board for February 4, 2020. To begin with, pursuant to the Board's authority under 940 CMR 29.10, paren 8, close paren, Board Member Heller will be participating remotely via telephone due to personal illness. There is a quorum physically present, and all votes taken will be recorded by roll call. So, any announcements from the Select Board? Mr. Fernandez, you want to go first?
Yeah, briefly. I will say that tomorrow at 6:30, well, officially starts at 7, but if you'd like some cookies and stuff like that, at 6:30 here in this room, the League of Women Voters is hosting their annual How and Why to Run for Office. They're covering all different townwide offices, from town meeting to library trustees to even select board and all other kinds of offices as well. So I'll be here. I encourage you to either attend or watch from home, and consider, as select board member Franco has said before, please consider running for one of these offices.
Great, great.
And just to complete that thought, nomination papers can be obtained from the town clerk's office, varying number of signatures that you need from registered voters in Brookline for different offices. And those nomination papers are due, as you will hear tomorrow evening, on March 17th. I have heard some confusion about when this election is. We're talking about a May 3rd election, I believe it is. May 5th. There is another election on March 3rd, which is has to do with the presidential primary. It's a partisan exercise, but usually we don't talk about partisan politics here, but wanted to differentiate between these different elections. Some folks have seen signs up and we're confused about what's a town election versus what's a different election. So March 3rd for presidential politics, May 5th for town offices.
Thank you for clearing that up for me. Okay. Any other comments?
I just have one thing to update the board. I wanted to let you know that we have submitted officially our real estate transfer fee legislation to our legislative delegation through Representative Vitolo, and I encouraged him to let us know when there are hearings on that and related bills. There does appear to be some renewed interest in this statewide this year, so I'll let you know if I hear anything on any bills, hearings on any of this or any related bills.
Great. Anything else?
Can I do one more? Unless
Sure.
you're going to do Lunar New Year.
No, you can do Lunar New Year.
Great. Very excited. Brookline's Pan-Asian Lunar New Year celebration is going to be this Saturday. It's at the Brookline High School from 3 to 5 p.m. This is a great event. A lot of people have been talking about it. This will be my first time going, so I'm very excited about it, and I hope others will join as well.
It's always a great event, great food, a lot of great people to meet. People who don't normally come out to town events are going to be there, and I always have fun, as well as entertainment. Okay, next, public comment. Mr. O'Neill.
Good evening, you guys. Good evening. Donald O'Neill, town meeting member from Precinct 4. I'm here for a couple of reasons. One is the citizens, well, the basic reason, citizens, police, interaction, the relationship. It's a little tense nowadays, and I don't feel like there's a grasp on it that I think something needs to be done about it. The collective bargaining agreement for the police, I feel needs to be addressed as soon as possible, because body cameras, I feel the police should have to protect them and also to protect the citizens. I've spoken with a few people already in regards to the body cameras, and both the union president said that there was no issue, that they agree with it. Also, town administrator Mel Kleckner said he didn't disagree with it. So I'm just curious why we have not enacted it yet. I really don't want to hear, this is not unusual, that we don't have any idea what we're talking about because it is an issue. And I feel it needs to be addressed. I had a neighbor, Mr. Jamal over here, who had a really negative experience with the Brookline Police Department on 22nd, if I'm not mistaken. Long story short, he's lived this area for a while, and he felt it wasn't okay for him to walk down Beacon Street. He told me he felt like he was on the wrong side of town. And for my neighbor to tell me that, it really hurt my heart. Like, it struck me to, I was expecting him to say Chestnut Hill or something, but he goes on and says the end of Beacon Street. And that hurt me. He had gun drawn, pulled on him, could have been shot, all over an anonymous caller, which is unacceptable. So like I said, I'm standing here because I would like to see before May, before we say at town meeting, that there's something in the budget or from you guys' objectives stating that you guys are back at the table, speaking with the police, having that conversation about their base pay or whatever we need to do to get them to agree to their contract. Them being a year out, of not having one is unacceptable. They protect us. I understand the fire department and school department, I hear that, but you can't compare the police to the fire or to the school. It's completely different. I understand if we can compare our Brookline Police Department to Newton to the Newton Police Department, who I think their base starts at $400, and it varies, drops down to $59. Like, talking about, putting the police and their union in the same category as the police, not with the school department or the fire department, because it's completely different. So, like I said, I would love to see, we need to see something happen by May. I would really appreciate it. I think the police need the body cameras more than the citizens, to be honest with you, to protect them as well as the citizens. And I mean, if you guys have any questions for me about why I'm standing here, y'all know I never get up here, so this is very important to me. And it's important to the citizens, to people who look like me walking up and down Brookline. It shouldn't. It still hurts me that he said he felt he was on the wrong side of town. That hurt. And then for him to have that negative interaction with the Brookline police, I don't want to go into details, but I can. But I don't think I should at this moment. I just feel something needs to be done sooner than later, and I would prefer the sooner. I wanted my neighbor to say something. If you feel comfortable saying something to the body about your experience and how you felt.
Like you said, I don't want to elaborate too much. I just feel like.
Are you able to go up to the microphone?
It's over there, will it reach?
Here, take it off.
Take it off,
Take it off.
Or pull it down.
I've been in the town since February of '08, so I feel like overall Brookline is a cool, diverse town. I've had my own experiences with life in the other part of town, so I haven't had too many experiences bad with the police over here. But sometimes I feel like, along with some of the citizens, they have this weird type of I don't know, it's just like a weird aura that some people have in the town. But overall, as a whole, the people are very cool. So that one little tiny percentage of people that I'm trying to speak at, from my point of view, doesn't affect how I feel about the whole town. But I just feel like sometimes with people not knowing how to communicate with each other and just having this type of perception on the way life is supposed to be, I don't know, it kind of makes people come off wary and things like that, and it's just hard to move around here is what I'm trying to say without trying to get in too deep about things. But it's cool, but sometimes it's hard to move around without feeling like somebody has put an optical type of illusion on society to make people look at certain people a certain type of way, you know what I'm saying? So I'm not here to fit into this type of world or nothing like that. So I feel like the times when I just move around, if that's a problem, I don't even, feel like going outside. So, I don't know. Overall, I think Brookline is cool, but it's just confusing sometimes. So, I don't know. There's mad cool. There's many, there's a lot of cool people in the town. I'm friends with people of all types of diverse backgrounds and things. But, the one part would be like for us to coexist. Whoever's running everything needs to learn how to play it off by, fixing that body language, like everything doesn't have to be verbal. There's a lot of microaggression. There's tiny subconscious things going on that are making people act certain ways. And they need to go rewire them parts to be able to play it off better, to make the agenda more effective without people being able to blow up the spot. And I see too deep to even be playing games, so it's cool. But so love is love. I love the town, but that's all I have to say.
Thank you. Mr. Fernandez, you want to
Yeah. If I can just say thank you for sharing that, I really appreciate you. And I just want to say, like, you belong here. This is your community as much as anybody else's, and you deserve to feel like you belong here. So to the extent that that's not happening for you right now, I'm sorry. And we as a community need to do better, for sure.
Ms. Frawley, you have a comment?
Gina Frawley from Precinct 16, Chestnut Hill. I hope that doesn't happen in my neighborhood. When it comes to the body cameras, which I am a big proponent of, keep in mind that we have a vote against surveillance cameras, and there are now body cameras for police that have surveillance, facial recognition inside the body cams, so we can't get that model. Thank you.
Thank you. So, at this point, I'd like to just make a public announcement. There is some... Do you have a comment, Mr. Stein? Why don't you come up and give it?
Okay, thank you. Good evening. Arthur Conquest, can you hear me?
Yep.
Thank you. Arthur Conquest, 115 Tappan Street. I won't go into specifics now, but at some point, I'm going to come back to you and ask to help me solve the problem of me, black people. I don't know. I had an incident this weekend where a security guard, not the police, not our police, but a security guard from an organization stopped me and asked me what was I doing on a public way, on a public sidewalk, and asking me for my name. I'm in the middle. I went back to the organization, and I'm just speaking with them and asking them to come up with a solution that will allow me to just pass their institution without having a security guard come up to me. And then even when I went back Monday to speak with them, they asked me during my visit if I had weapons. I mean, that's just not the way I would envision this town treating its citizens. And at some point, as I said, I want to come back to you and bring this to some greater community conversation about how we as black people fit into this community. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Conklin. Okay, so in light of previous controversy regarding a hearing that we had related to a complaint with respect to the police, there is some concern that police wearing uniforms in a setting where they are supporting one of their fellow officers was deemed by some people as being inappropriate. So what I've done is we've asked the Chief Lipson to draft a policy on the wearing of uniforms in certain situations to address the concerns raised, but also to take into consideration the First Amendment rights and other rights of police in situations like occurred back in December. So the Select Board will work on the Chief's draft to come up with a policy that we can submit for approval as a general policy of the police department in accordance with the procedures for doing that we have. So actually, at this point, I'd like to ask if any Select Board members would like to participate in that process, receiving the Chief's ideas and working with it to come up with a final general policy for the police department.
I'd be happy to help.
Okay, anyone else?
I could help on that.
Okay, so only two,
Yeah.
not a quorum. Okay, so Ms. Fernandez and Ms. Hamilton. Okay, moving on. Question of approving Select Board minutes from January 21st, 2020. Any corrections or edits? No? I move approval. Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller? Aye. Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. So going into our miscellaneous calendar, question of approving extra work order number 10 in the amount of $120,000 for De La Sandro Corporation, rental rates for snow plowing and ice control. Commissioner Pepper Sturgeon, please explain why we have a snow and ice problem during these warm winter months of January and February.
Well, I hope that.
I know it's not that's
I
not
hope
the
you're not
right
going to
way.
jinx it on me now, because I'm trying to get out of this winter with the least amount of pain as I can. But we have had 16 inches of snow so far this year, and over a course of 10 events, we label each storm as an event. 5 of those events had multiple inches of snow. The other 5 were ice events. We have had the contractor in on 3 of those 5 events. Unfortunately, we're at the whim of the forecasters, just like everyone else. And when they forecast 8 to 10 inches of snow, we have to be prepared for that, even if it only ends up being 3 or 4 inches of snow. So right now, actually, in comparison to other years, we have a very small deficit in our rental equipment line item. As you recall, the town administrator did invoke Chapter 44, Section 31D back in December, which allows us to deficit spend the snow and ice control budget, hoping that we'll reconcile it when we get closer towards the end of the fiscal year. So we are incurring deficits, but in this particular case, we have a contractual arrangement with De La Sandro Corporation, and we have exceeded the original purchase order this year, which is the reason why we need your approval for an extra work order. The amount is designed to not only cover the existing deficit, but to kind of forecast what we think we'll need to get through the next 2 months. Hopefully, we don't end up spending any of it, and it all goes back to free cash. But in the event that we need to have it, it saves me from coming back to the board again for an additional extra work order. So that's where the amount of 120 comes from.
Okay, any questions from the board?
Did you say what the original purchase order was?
It was $80,000.
Any other questions? I move approval of the extra work order number 10 in the amount of $120,000 for the Alessandro Corporation, rental rates for snow plowing and ice control. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller? Aye. Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you. Next, question of approving contract PW 2020 for the engineering services agreement, rehabilitation of Washington Street with World Tech Engineering LLC in the amount of $94,500. Commissioner.
Thank you,
again.
Mr. Chairman. This is a very exciting project that we're going to be talking about with you many times in the coming months. We are launching a complete rehabilitation project for the length of Washington Street that runs from Station Street in Brookline Village all the way to and including the crossing at Beacon Street at Washington Square. This is a very comprehensive project. If you've traveled Washington Street in that stretch, you will realize that it's in dire need of repair. This is going to be a showcase project for us going forward to showcase our new complete streets policy, and we're hoping to make it a masterpiece with complete reconstruction. Some of the items are to improve safety, provide efficient traffic operations, expand sidewalks, streetscape enhancements, and employ complete streets and healthy transportation concepts along that entire stretch of the road. We did originally envision going the full length of Washington Street to the town line. However, with the construction or the upcoming construction of the Driscoll School, we thought it prudent perhaps pull back and stop short of the limits where the school construction will be going on. We could always add that later on, depending on what roadway improvements are needed to accommodate bus lanes or drop-off lanes for the new school. So this project has been estimated to be about a $13 million project, and we've enlisted the services of World Tech Engineering, who has done many projects for us in the past. They're currently doing the traffic signal design for Woodland and Hammond Street in South Brookline, and many other projects as well. But they are preparing several documents that will provide for the basis for potential funding through the state TIP program. They've worked closely with MassDOT in the past. This phase of the project will include elements associated with preparing and submitting a comprehensive funding request to MassDOT. It will include traffic data collection, road safety audits, completing a functional design report, development of a conceptual design and associated order of magnitude cost estimates, as well as attending community meetings, all in preparation of getting the project on the docket for the state TIP. So we're hoping that as we move forward, we've phased the design of this project. This first phase is the $94,500 that's before you tonight, and that's to prepare all these conceptual plans in anticipation of the funding request, as long as the applications for grants. Once that's completed, and if we are successful, then we'll come back before you to get funding for the Phase 2 portion of which will include design and actual preparation of construction documents. So it's anticipated that this is going to be a multi-year project, highly visible project, as you can imagine, but one I think that will provide a showcase for the town in the years to come, long after I'm gone, and give us a real noteworthy project. As you asked, I did drag the Director of Engineering and Transportation up here with me tonight and made him at least be present in the audience. This is his last Board of Selectmen meeting as a permanent employee. He will be here for a while going forward, but I thought he might want to come and say goodbye. So thank you for your time on this.
Well, maybe Mr. Diddle can come up and talk to the community about, in particular, Washington and Cypress, which a lot of people are very concerned about in terms of safety issues there, and use that as an opportunity to send us off as you go into your next phase in life.
It's no secret that Washington Street is probably one of the worst conditioned streets in town, and it's long overdue for some work. The Commissioner is very interested, as am I, about getting this off the floor and on the drafting table. So I think it's going to be a great project. Hope to be around to see it complete. But in the interim, I'd just like to say that I've had 50 good years of being employed by the town of Brookline. You know, if I had to do it all over again, I wouldn't change a thing. It's a great place to work. The people are great to work with, and I think I'm going to miss it a lot, but it's a hard decision, but it's one I think I have to make at this point in time. And I just want to thank everybody here for helping me out.
The question about Washington and Cypress was just an excuse to get you up here so that we could express how much we appreciate the work that you've done for the town all these years, and wish you a great retirement or whatever else you end up doing. Again, we appreciate all the things you've done. At least in my case, when I've had to work with you, it's always been very satisfactory and very, fulfilling in terms of the task before us. So,
Thank you.
did you want to say something?
I'll express my thanks as well. 51 years, I think, is exactly how long you've been here.
Don't cheat us out of 1 year.
Yeah. That's long and dedicated service, I think, by any measure, and I appreciate your diligence and your dedication to this board and predecessor boards and the residents of the town. So thank you, best wishes, and enjoy your newfound free time.
Thank you.
Okay. So, any questions or comments for?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do have a question for you, though. And first of all, thank you so much. I'm glad we had the opportunity to bring you back here so we can thank you in person for all your work. I don't know if you caught that from last time, but we were hoping you'd be here, so we're glad you're here. So the chair threw you a softball. I'll throw you a hardball. You can still hit this one out of the park. But I'm sure that you all have thought about in this massive project ensuring that. I think about projects where we do a lot of great work, and then a year later, here comes National Grid digging up our streets. Are we going to sort of, let's say, along the length what you're thinking about right now, are we essentially going to fix any and all gas leaks that are there, and anything that we can predict someone might want to dig for, understanding there are things we can't predict for later, to get that done before this project is underway?
Yeah, this will give us an opportunity to do that, because it's going to be a long design phase in that portion. So we'll get the utility companies on early and right to work in hopefully replacing the gas main in that portion of the street.
Hello?
Yes, Ms. Heller.
Yes, I'll say that Raoul read my mind. I know that this project itself is not going to involve digging up the street yet, but clearly we're going to plan to, and digging up the sidewalk. There's no reason that gas leaks need to be just under the street. They could be under the sidewalk as well. So I would hope that we give National Grid plenty of notice to come out and do the investigations that they need to do, so that we don't hear any excuses about how they can't get it into their schedule. And it may be part of this project that we actually ask them to go up and down Washington Street and figure out where the gas leaks are. Give us a map, so we'll know that when we're designing the actual construction and the tearing up and how long it will take, that we'll have an idea of what we're dealing with.
Okay, any other questions?
I will just urge for a conversation with World Tech Engineering to stress that I personally would like to see a design that really prioritizes transit use. It is a key bus route, so I'd like the design to reflect some sort of prioritization around the bus that uses Washington Street. Whatever they want to do with that, I'm sure they can come up with something brilliant.
Yeah. No, I agree. That's a very important point, because bus lines, as well as the Green Line trains, are the way in which people can access huge parts of the region. And Brookline is fortunate to have those opportunities. We need to make sure that those infrastructures, or the infrastructure for them, are developed properly. So, okay, no more questions. I'll call for a vote. Approval of contract PW 2020 for engineering services agreement, rehabilitation of Washington Street with World Tech Engineering in the amount of $94,500. All in favor? Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. No. I mean, yeah, no. Okay, next, question of accepting the fiscal year 2020 Student Awareness of Fire Education, SAFE, and Senior SAFE grants in the following amounts: $6,963 for the SAFE grant, $2,930 for the Senior SAFE grant. Chief Sullivan.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, and members of the Select Board. We're here again to ask the Select Board to accept the Senior SAFE and SAFE grants for fiscal year 2020. As you can see in the literature, over the course of the last 20 years, the SAFE grant, Student Awareness for Fire Education grant, has resulted in a 76% drop in child fire deaths over the course of that time in the Commonwealth, which is truly an astounding statistic. So we know, that it's working. We were able to touch nearly 100 classrooms between pre-K and second grade over the course of the last year using those funds, along with our Senior SAFE grant, where we have given over 10 presentations to senior groups throughout the town in that time, as well as we provided 15 or more installations of smoke detectors from the funds from that grant as well. So the statistical data from the Senior SAFE grant is still accumulating. It's only been 6 years for Senior SAFE, but we're sure that that will also have the same kind of impact for our most vulnerable populations as time goes by. And we ask the acceptance of those grants from the Executive Office of Public Safety.
Any questions?
What are the types of educational, highlights that, I guess, led to this reduction?
Well, obviously, we stress having a plan. It used to be called EDITH, but it's exit drills in the house. Those are important pieces to any student awareness so that it engages the parents to come to the table as well and draw up plans for the family to have a place to stage in the event of a fire. The predominance of the education is about preventing fires and making sure that children know, what's hot and what they can touch and what they shouldn't touch, staying away from lighters, staying away from candles, good practices, as well as the ability to create an environment where every home has a working smoke detector and carbon monoxide detector, and that we have the kids who are the advocates to make sure that the parents do what they're supposed to do and make sure that they have those things in place. So all of those things over the course of years have created this downturn. Just basic education. In my generation, there was no education about fire safety. And then as my kids, grew, and even the generation before them, fire education became normalized within the school systems and within the public discourse, and it has just had a you know, a really dramatic effect over the course of time, so that we get the early detection. People know where they should go and where they shouldn't go, and what they should do and what they shouldn't do. So a lot of things go into it, as well as our fire prevention folks and the UL listings to make sure that the cords that we use and the circuits that we put into new homes, into constructions, are all, you know, fire safe. So there's a number of different things that go into it, but we're really proud of the outcome for sure.
Thank you.
Any other questions? I move approval of the Student Awareness of Fire Education and Senior Safe Grants in the amounts of $69.63 for the Safe Grant and $29.30 for the Senior Safe Grant. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. Okay, question of accepting a grant from the fiscal year 19 Urban Areas Security Initiative in the amount of $140,000 to fund salary and some associated costs for a newly created position, Deputy Director of Emergency Management. Is that going to be in the fire department?
It is going to be under the umbrella of the fire department moving forward, Mr. Chairman. So
Tell us what this is.
So when I took over as fire chief and became part of the emergency management team, at that point, Chief O'Leary had moved on in his retirement, and so we were acting under the direction of an acting director of emergency management for that time. What became readily apparent to me, as someone who's worked in emergency management at a larger scale over the course of my career, is that a lot of our pieces were disparate, that the police were doing some things, the fire department was doing some things, public health was doing some things, but we didn't have any real coordination with regard to our grant opportunities, our training opportunities, and to me that was an obvious place where we could improve how we do business in terms of emergency management for the town. After Chief Lipson came on board, he and I had some discussions and some deliberations with the town administrator, and I was asked to become the emergency management director as of last July. One of the things that we recognize as an emergency management team is the need for day-to-day coordination of all of those aspects of our town's ability to maintain our safe ability to respond to emergencies at a higher holistic level. We've taken on some of that opportunity by training the emergency management team. We have a number of different grant funds that need to be administered, and this opportunity came to us through UASI and the Planning and Community Preparedness Grant that we would be able to look at seeding, if you will, a position within the town to take on the responsibility of coordination of emergency management on a daily basis, so that it would bring all of those disparate pieces together and make it a cohesive plan for the town moving forward. The funding is anticipated to cover an 18-month period. At that point, the town would pick up the funding for that position moving forward. We truly believe that the benefit in grant monies and the opportunities that will come to the town of Brookline from having that cohesive coordination through this position will pay for itself over the course of time. So that was the opportunity that came before us. We put that up through the UASI region, and were awarded $140,000 through this preparedness grant to start that process, and we're here today to ask authorization to accept the award. I've been working with the HR department on a job description. We've been culling the job description to fit the needs of the town, and that will go before the HR board hopefully next week if we get approval today. So the first process was to get the funding. We have the funding, just needs your approval. If we get the approval, we'll move to the HR board to adopt the position and the pay scale and approve the position. Back to you, to the select board to hire, and then we'll go out to advertise and go from there if approved.
Okay, any questions?
I assume the $140,000 is the fully loaded cost of the position, so it's salary plus benefits
In an 18-month period.
in an 18-month period.
Right. We're a little beyond the timeframe that we originally had anticipated. It was dependent on when the grant award came in. We were expecting it to come in earlier in January, so it would actually move us, by the time we get through the process of the HR board and coming back to you folks and advertising and going through all that, we're probably looking at sometime as an April timeframe, so we might be able to move into the fiscal '22 budget and for about 4 months moving forward. I want to thank Select Person Hernandez and Fernandez for his information today with Mr. Ananian, and we were able to take care of those questions and make sure that the town is on good footing going forward.
Mr. Fernandez, can you tell us what those questions were?
Sure.
Because I'm about to ask a question. I
Sure.
want to make sure I don't duplicate what you're saying.
Right. And I, what I was going to say about this is either the second or maybe third time that I've asked you, Chief, to answer something over email. In this case, it was a question of a town meeting member, and in every single instance, you've given a quick and complete answer and have checked with the appropriate parties. I promise not to take advantage of that, to ask you too often, the day before a meeting to ask you some questions. But I think that was really terrific. Can you do a better job of characterizing town meeting member Ananian's question than I can? Probably.
Sure. He basically wanted to, his concern was that he had read in articles in his research back several years ago that the current administration of the White House had threatened to withhold monies and grants for communities that were potentially or were sanctuary city communities. That was struck down by 2 different federal judges in a court of appeals, and so that was not allowed by the courts. Further, there have been instances where the federal government has tried to kind of put poison pills into different grant writings so that communities would have to share information that they didn't anticipate if they accepted grants. We asked the Executive Office of Public Safety for the City of Boston, who administers these grants for the Uwasi region. This is an award from a grant, so we're kind of the next tier down. And they have combed through the grant process and assure us that there is no such language within any of these grant opportunities that we need to be concerned about.
So actually, that was sort of the preface for my question, or my actually maybe a statement. We're all paranoid for the reasons that you indicated, especially with respect to Homeland Security related issues. So I guess my comment is just please be aware of ways in which poison pills or poison whatever can be slipped into not only the agreements but the operating procedures for some of these some of the activities that this person will be engaged with. I'm thinking, of course, obviously the facial recognition bylaw that we have, but also in addition to restrictions that are attempted to be imposed on sanctuary cities, there may be efforts to sort of put poison language into agreements regarding housing of immigrants detained by Customs and Border Patrol or other things like that. So my only comment is please be aware of or be on the lookout for those types of provisions or other things, and just make sure that we're engaged in understanding and addressing it properly. So.
We will definitely, be vigilant about those things. And the irony is that I am here asking for, the funding to put a person in place full-time who will do just what you're asking us to do. So this position will be, the guard on the wall, if you will, to make sure the eyes, so that we have everything, kind of filtering through one, one organization instead of this group's doing something over there and this group's doing something over there, and we're not filtering it through the eyes of the scrutiny that we need, and so this position will do that.
All right. So meaning that in the language of the position, or the language used to advertise the position, that it's
Yep.
clear that, that would be one of the responsibilities of the
requirements,
person,
yes.
right?
Absolutely. We'll make sure that's in the, it has oversight of grant funding in the language already, but we'll make sure that we have tightened that up and address your concerns.
Any other questions? I move approval of the acceptance of a grant from fiscal year 19 Urban Areas Security Initiative in the amount of $140,000 to fund salary and some associated costs for a newly created position, Deputy Director of Emergency Management. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you. Question of approving the application for a change in the doing business as from, or change in the DBA, from catering to you, doing business as catering to you at 210 Harvard Street, to catering to events, doing business as catering to events, 210 Harvard Street. Catering to you is a holder of a food vendor license. Any questions from the board? I think all the approvals were in there.
It's just a name.
Yeah,
I think the police department reviewed it and saw no reason to deny the request.
right. So, all in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Question of approving a temporary wine and malt beverages sales license to W.H. Lincoln PTO to be held on Friday, February 7, 2020, for a trivia game night from 6 to 10 p.m., 19 Kennard Road. Any questions? Everything, I believe, is in order here, too?
The paperwork's in order, and the police department sees no reason to deny the application.
All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Question of approving a temporary wine and malt beverages sales license to Olive Connection to be held on Wednesday, February 12, 2020, for a cooking demonstration event from 6 to 8 p.m. at 1426 Beacon Street. Any questions regarding this application?
Paperwork seems to be in order, and the police department sees no reason to deny the application.
All right, it's a fairly straightforward application. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Okay, now to our calendar. Authorization to hire the library.
Sarah Slyman.
Good evening,
Ms. Slyman,
Sarah
how you doing?
Slyman. Hi, Library Director. I'm here this evening to seek authorization to hire a business manager for the library. It's a full-time position in the administrative department of the library.
Any questions? I have one question.
Okay.
In the authorization to hire form, item 11, which usually has not necessarily useful information regarding how we're going to reach out to seek a diverse applicant pool, you have, pardon me?
Usually some.
Usually something, right?
Is it blank?
That's blank,
Oh, I
yeah.
must have used an old form, I'm sorry.
Okay.
The HR department had auto-filled that for
Mm-hmm.
future use, but I might have pulled an old form.
Okay,
Sorry.
so
So
just-
one of the things that the library is really trying to partner aggressively with HR on is getting out to job fairs so that we can
Mm-hmm.
try to seek more diverse candidates than we see coming across the bow a lot of the times for libraries.
Right. Do we have local library schools, don't we?
We
Or
do,
used
Simmons
to.
College, yep.
Simmons is the
one
only
of them.
one now?
And URI. Those are the only two within driving distance, but most, I would say, most people do their program online now. There are a lot of very reputable remote learning
really?
classes, yeah. University of Illinois Champaign-Urbana is it was the first, and they're incredible. And one of our library assistants just enrolled in I think, University of Washington at Olympia. So it's exciting because then you have to go once or twice a year and meet with your advisor, so you get to go see other parts of the country.
A new world.
Yeah, yep.
New educational world. Mr. Fernandez is in academia. Watch out.
I also have taught online, too. So.
Okay. Any other questions? No? Okay, I move approval of the authorization to fill the position of Library Business Manager, KA5, for the Public Library. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lehman. Question of Question of authorization to fill the position of firefighter for the fire department in the suppression division. Chief Sullivan again.
John Sullivan, Fire Chief. Good evening again. The Fire Department is requesting the Select Board to authorize the hiring of one firefighter. At this point, we had an application to rehire Mr. Matthew Lynch, who was a firefighter who came on to the Fire Department in 2004 and served 12 years with distinction. And at that time, he took a voluntary resignation and sought an opportunity as a private business owner. He has since decided that that is not the course that he wanted to continue to follow, and has sought through the rules of civil service a rehire within the designated 5 years at the authority's recommendation. We can rehire him within the 5 years straight from his resignation status. Mr. Lynch comes with an unblemished record and is highly regarded by those supervisors on staff who are still here that had him as a firefighter under their supervision. And we are if approved tonight, we will move to go through the process of a background check, physical examination, and the steps to rehire. At this point, we have 3 unfilled vacancies with 2 recent retirements, so we have some room, and would help us out to have an experienced firefighter who we're going to put through a retraining process in our brand-new training division that you all were able to come down and see, and we'll get him back on the line hopefully sometime in the early spring.
Good. Any questions from the board? Would firefighter like to say something? Or
He's not here this evening.
Oh, I'm
That's
sorry.
the next one.
I'm sorry.
No worries.
Okay. You should have told me this before. Okay.
Just going by the agenda, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, okay, good. Me too. So authorization to hire. I move approval for authorization to hire, to fill the position of firefighter for the fire department in the suppression division. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Okay,
Thank you,
next,
Mr.
question of approving the following promotion within the fire department. Firefighter Timothy C. Anastas to lieutenant. I hope I pronounced it reasonably correctly. Good. Yes.
Thank you,
Mr.
Mr.
Sullivan.
Chair. Firefighter Anastas a little bit jumped the gun and got up here. He's excited because this is an exciting moment for any department head to be able to promote one of their own to the next level, and to watch the next generation of leadership progress into those positions. Firefighter Anastas has been with the department since 2014. He graduated second in his academy class, and he has shown incredible initiative over the course of the time that he's been on the fire department, as well as before he got on the fire department. He completed his emergency medical technician, firefighter 1-2, hazardous materials operations level while in the academy, and then went on to further pursue certifications as fire instructor 1 and rope rescue technician 1-2 after he graduated on his own accord. He received a bachelor's degree in international relations from Boston University in 2013, and went on to earn a master's degree in healthcare emergency management in 2015 from the Boston University Medical School. And if that wasn't enough, in 2018, he completed his associate degree in nursing from Bunker Hill Community College. He has been serving as a temporary lieutenant with distinction since March of 2019, and has exemplified the best of the Brookline Fire Department. In the short time that I've known Tim, he is a real go-getter, someone who is willing to stand up and lead from the front, and that's a quality that we are really keen on in the fire service, as decision makers are what we need. And Tim is not afraid to put himself out there and make a decision and be at the forefront and stand on his his immeasurable self-determination to make sure that his folks are willing to follow, and he's out front leading. So it is with a great deal of pleasure that I ask the Select Board to consider the promotion of firefighter Timothy Anastas to the rank of lieutenant.
With that introduction, how can we not? Okay. Any questions?
I'll just say thank you for your past service to the town since 2014, and your continued service to the town as a temporary lieutenant for about the last year. I think being a lieutenant in the fire department is perhaps one of the most important ranks, given that it's a frontline leader. I know that the chief and others in the leadership of the fire department rely on the lieutenants to be the eyes and the ears and to make sure that apparatus is performing at a high level. So you've had ample experience a year doing that, and look forward to you continuing to do it far into the future.
Okay. Mr. Fernandez?
If I can also say, just, I think it speaks really highly of the profession and of our department in particular, that someone with your skills and background, Go Terriers, academic background in particular, but everything that you've done to say, I'm going to take these skills and this skill set and bring it to bear in the fire department, and particularly here in Brookline, I think speaks highly of the profession, speaks highly of Brookline, and speaks highly of you. So thanks for being here.
I'll say, leadership is a very tricky skill, and to hear that you really get buy-in from those under you and you lead from that, it is pleasing to us. That is, in my opinion, a symbol of a true leader.
Okay.
Firefighter Anastas has his mother and his brother, and who else do we have? His girlfriend and her parents. His girlfriend is also a member of the Brookline family and one of Brookline's finest in the Brookline Police Department.
Okay.
So,
Well, before you pin him, okay, we have to approve it.
I'm just saying who's here, Mr. Chair. I learned my lesson the last time.
Okay, on the question of approving the following promotion from the fire department, firefighter Timothy C. Anastas to lieutenant. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye.
And now,
Oh, yes.
Tim, why don't you come on up? Who do you have pinning you tonight? Yep. All right, try that again, just for the, there you go, close enough, there you go, perfect. Thank you. You got somebody else over there. Thank you very much. Tim, congratulations on behalf of the men and women of the fire department. We look forward to your leadership for many, many years to come. As I do with all of the folks that I get a chance to promote, you probably have one of these, but this is the first generation 3502 key, which is the elevator key for every elevator in the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. So it's great to have a first generation, because that makes sure you get it every single time. And when the time counts, you need to have the right tools, and that's one of the right tools. Congratulations. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Congratulations on the members of the board, sir.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
Very much.
I'm not going to shake your hands, but I got the sniffles, but congratulations. I appreciate it.
Congratulations.
Come on up, Tim. Would you like photos of that? I think this group that just promoted you. Just as a suggestion. Keep reading. Families getting pictures. Family can come on up and get closer if you want to. If I may, Mr. Chair, I just want to recognize the leadership of Local 950 that's joining us tonight, President Paul Trahan and Secretary Treasurer James Clinton.
Great, thank you. Moving back. Administrator coming back?
I think we can do interviews.
Okay. We'll move on without him. How difficult can this be? Okay, boards and commissions interviews. Following candidates for appointment/reappointment to boards and commissions will appear for interview. Cannabis Mitigation Advisory Committee, first Kimberly Daly. Please come up. And before, come on up. I just want to make an announcement. So we have a large number of applicants for the positions on this committee. And I don't want the board to have to deliberate, in public, trying to figure out who to select. So what I've asked Ms. Heller and Ms. Hamilton to do is to be the group that looks through the applicants and makes a recommendation to the board, of course, properly justified, so that we can vote on the membership of these committees in a more, in an easier way than going through, doing that here at this board meeting. And I appreciate their willingness to undertake this task. So tell us who you are and why you want to be on this
My name
committee.
is Kim Daly. I live at the Brook House. I'm a 25-year resident of the neighborhood. I'm also a NETA employee for the last 18 months, and I've been following a lot of the meetings, beginning with the last outreach meeting that NETA had, the community outreach meeting, which is really, in some ways, one of the first of these types of meetings I had ever been to, and it was a shocker. So that's what got me interested in this. I heard a lot of things at that meeting that were not so much about NETA, but about the things that the town needed to do. I heard some good suggestions and some kind of terrifying suggestions, and I just feel like I have a chance maybe to bring a little balance to it as a longtime resident and also as somebody who works in that industry, about what might be done, who might do it. And, without a doubt, I do have a few opinions about the effect of the town, the effects that NETA's had on the town. I'm not practiced at politics at all, but I do think I have a fairly even-handed approach to things. That's really just why I wanted to get involved.
So, now, as a NETA employee, I don't think it's a conflict or anything, but NETA will be participating in the activities of the committee. How would you bring a sort of different or additional perspective to the committee, in addition to, Ned as representative?
Well, I actually have a pretty good understanding of the regulations. I work with them every day. I'm in an inventory department, so I spend a lot of time with record keeping and that sort of thing. I think a knowledge of the rules, the things that, are limited or not is helpful in this situation. But again, I've never been on a committee like this before, so I don't understand necessarily the nature of the work. I'm just here to volunteer to do some of it.
There are many other committees in town, so if we don't select you for this one, please consider others. Any other questions?
I mean, it may not be a direct conflict according to state ethics, but I don't see how it isn't really a conflict for you. Because the two companies in town that will be subject to a lot of what this committee ends up recommending will be your employer.
Right.
So let's say that you serve on the committee and some of the things that are recommended cost the employer. How do you think you will be able to balance those interests between serving on the committee, but also recommending things that might end up
Costing money.
your employer?
Well, I mean, there is a certain amount set aside for this, for the mitigation. And NETA has provided a lot of funds. I assume anyone else who opens up in the neighborhood is also going to be providing some funds. Is there a plan to come after additional funds, or?
Not necessarily, but
Okay.
anyone can bring a warrant article.
Yeah, well, there's that, I guess. I don't know. I mean, the question becomes, is it reasonable? Is it reasonable? Are we, is NETA causing some harm someplace in a way that cash might fix? But I do know the level of effort is put in at NETA to try and mitigate things, but I also know the limits of what they are able to do. And I heard a lot of people in the community meeting asking, the town to do things. A lot of the requests were not anything that NETA could fulfill. So I think it's certainly, it's not coming out of my pocket. So, that's a piece of it too. But this is, a complex problem for Brookline right now, I think. It's also a complex problem for NETA, and a lot of things are out of its control as well. I don't intend to bring, we're a private company, I don't intend to bring company information in. But these are public meetings, so anything we're working on, they would see, of course. They stay on top of it. I don't really feel like that's truly a conflict if it's just about money. I'm more about I could see more of a conflict if what was being asked was unfair in terms of the level of effort, or similar things like that. But I don't really see spending as an issue. I think getting the money spent seems to be an issue right now. Correct?
So you've mentioned two times that there's a perception that the town needs to do things. What do you think the town needs to do? What are the low-hanging fruit? What should the first actions of this advisory committee be?
Well, I heard a lot of requests for more police presence. Even though we constantly have police presence, but for not necessarily detail cops, but other police to be around. The town could possibly get involved in what goes on with the CCC. Making requests to the CCC. A lot of the reason that NETA is an island in the middle of this in the middle of the city right now has to do with those regulations. I don't know if you follow them very well, but right now they're in a bit of flux. They, I would say, have made a couple of fairly random actions that just, I mean, they tend to contradict themselves in terms of what we are doing sometimes. They're, I know, looking to get deeper into host community agreements and to have some oversight on those. That's, you know, a piece of it where the town might get involved. These are just, I mean, just off the top of my head.
So you mentioned comments at meetings that you've attended that you found to be somewhat difficult or
Yeah.
bad. My question to all the candidates is, how well do you work with other, would work with other committee members, some of whom may be very difficult or disagreeable on this issue, a
Yeah,
very
I mean,
emotional, very hot button type issue in this town?
I think, seen, and I've seen a number of the same people at some of these meetings coming forth. I know what some of their points of view are about this, but I'm also, I mean, I'm willing to say if I think something is morally wrong. I mean, in particular, you know, people requesting things like private police forces or, you know, things that are kind of out of left field and vaguely authoritarian. That stuff's uncomfortable. But
I'm really asking you just to give me a sense of how you would work in a committee like that, or like this committee will be, where there's conflict and disagreement over some very emotional issues. I mean, how well do you work within that environment?
I think I'm usually pretty level emotionally. I'm not normally I'm not a shouter. I'm not conflict avoidant, but I'm direct most of the time. I try not to take anything too personally, but
That's an important
it's
skill.
important.
Don't take anything personally.
Yeah.
We never take anything personally here on this board, right? Okay. Okay, any other questions? Okay, I mentioned the process we're going to go through. I think we're closing the applicant pool, or the applications, maybe next week or the week after that, and we'll make our decisions at that point. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, next, Boylston Street Corridor Study Committee. Mr. Fernandez, would you like to give us sort of a brief introduction to this?
Sure.
Sorry I didn't mention this before.
No, it's okay. So this is the study committee for Boylston Street, that area of Route 9 that stretches from actually where about Netta is to where the award-winning Riffalo Cafe, which was it named? I think maybe the #1 environmentally friendly restaurant
Right.
in the Commonwealth.
With the
recently.
James Beard awarded chef. Wow.
Okay.
Who would have known?
Right, so that stretch is what we're talking about right now. This works, this is going to build on the work of a previous visioning committee, and is going to be looking at that stretch in terms of what development might look there, residential as well as potentially commercial development, but that's something that we're going to get together and be talking about in the very near future. So we have 2 applicants today for this committee, and we're hoping to be able to interview more and get this committee started right away.
Okay, so Jason Bowers, come up, tell us who you are and why you want to be on this committee.
Good evening, I'm Jason Bowers. I'm a registered architect in the Commonwealth, and I'm on White Place, so we're right around the corner from it. I have a lot of interest in that stretch of road. I drive on it whenever I'm going out and about, and there's a lot of issues with it. And right around the corner, there's a lot of really beautiful commercial areas with beautiful buildings. My background in architecture is with a firm called Bay Architects, who do a lot of work with historic structures as well as contemporary structures and how you marry the two together. I don't have a background in transportation planning or urban planning, but I do have a keen interest in the area.
Any questions?
What's something that you would like to see kind of fostered in that corridor?
Well, I think there's a couple of things, and they're related but not completely integrated. One is traffic speed, I think, is a challenge on that road. There's also a really interesting mixture of lot sizes and building typologies on it. And right now, it doesn't really hang together, as they say, as a cohesive whole. Not that it has to, but it's not working well right now. And I think that the more you can bring a better mixture of tenants and buildings there, that'll help reduce maybe some of the traffic, and I think it'll help grow Brookline Village commercial area.
So the corridor on the eastern side is adjacent to the Brookline Housing Authority building on High Street. I don't believe that that's part of the corridor. Give me your thoughts in terms of how you can ensure that the Boylston Street corridor doesn't become sort of a beautiful, avenue and fails to incorporate in some way the needs and the interests of the people in that housing authority building.
I would say the definition of beauty, there's an aesthetic definition of beauty that is, I think, abstract. You can look at a building and say that's a beautiful building, but if you want to look holistically at what makes a beautiful neighborhood, it's supporting all the different community members. So I don't think we would want anybody that's adjacent to be omitted from that. And I think it's really for everyone living in the neighborhood.
Do you have any ideas as to how to bring those desperate elements of the population together and in a...
There was the MIT study that was done a couple years ago. I looked at it a couple years ago when it came out with great interest, and I said, oh, this is really exciting. So I'll be honest, I haven't gone back through and read that, and I know that there was a recent PDF that was sent out that's, I think it's sort of the kickoff document for this, and I haven't had a chance to sort of dig into that. But I don't have any initial ideas, but I do have an interest and an excitement about it.
Good. Any other questions?
How'd you find out about the committee?
Twitter, I think, or something like that. Yeah. No, I
We
think,
reach people.
Yeah, I've been looking for a way to get involved with the community and using my background in architecture. And this is sort of in my neck of the woods, and it's something that I'm interested in. And I think it's also an interesting and complex problem. And I think there's a lot long-term that can be done along that stretch of road.
Well said.
One question: Are there specific projects you've worked on before that you think would lend to this work here?
I have done work for educational clients where we are, for example, I did a project for an independent school down in Providence, Rhode Island, small urban campus, about 900 students, and there was a series of brick buildings that were the academic core, and then there were houses that the school had purchased, and we designed a new sort of welcome center that connected those pieces together. The building wasn't necessarily historicist. It took a lot of the sort of obviously the datums and some of the geometry from some of those historic structures as a way to talk about the future and the present, but also respect the history there. So I think that's the kind of angle, and that's how I've built my professional career, is on bridging those together.
Thank you.
Good. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Okay, Ms. Heller.
Can you hear me? So, Mr. Powers, I'm curious, what problems do you experience in Brookline Village as a result of NETA, and do you have any ideas of how they should be mitigated?
Okay. The challenges of NETA, I think it's, I know there's other folks.
as this relates to the the Lower Boylston Committee?
Oh, I'm sorry, he's on the Boylston Street corridor.
Yeah, okay. Although he did mention Netta.
Well, I mean, I live on White Place, and it's been very divisive, and I'll, you know, it's a challenge where we are.
With being on the phone and not having.
Yeah, I will say this is, you know, my line about Netta, or the way I feel about it is, it's a beautiful building, and it's a resource for the community, and it's not a tenant that I frequent. And I would rather have a tenant there that, something that me and my family would use, but that's a different question. It's real estate and renters, so.
Good. Okay. We'll probably set up a procedure similar to the Cannabis Advisory Committee to select the final membership, and we'll be in touch at that point. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, Bill Rayout, I'm sorry. Rout? Bill.
Rails, yes, Bill Rails, Chestnut Street, and I am interested in this committee because I walk through the area on a daily basis, at least twice a day. I cross Route 9 at Cypress on my way to and from the T, and I, you know, just feel like for some reason I'm drawn to these sort of underutilized places that are near transit. My background's in urban planning. I work for the State Department of Housing and Community Development. I run a smart growth zoning program there. I also am very interested in walkability. I have been on the Walk Boston board for a number of years. And when I walk through that area, it just seems like there's room for improvement. And that, you know, it's not a place that I feel like anyone would describe as a great place, that a destination that people want to go to. And, you know, we have needs in the town from an economic development standpoint and a housing standpoint. And I just think, so anyway, that's where I'm coming from. That's my interest.
Anyone want to start off the questioning?
Where to begin? You're right, there's a lot of opportunity there. Some of the oldest photos that I've seen of Brookline Village show a trolley going, you know, up Route 9. How high is too high for buildings along there?
Well, I think there's a couple of buildings there already that I think sort of establish maybe a precedent for certain parcels anyway. I'm not, I have no objections to height, but I obviously realize that, you know, there are certain parcels that, you know, well, it's a pretty tight corridor in general, and backs up to residential, you know, lower scale residential. So I think, you know, I think the zoning committee would have to be sensitive to that, obviously. I don't have a hard and fast answer to that at this point, but I think that the, you know, the couple of taller buildings that are there now seem to me like they don't seem out of place to me or unreasonable. Leave it at that.
Thank you.
So this is going to be part or connected to Brookline's gateway, entrance to, you know, the town. So similar to the question I asked previous applicant, Mr. Bowers, how do you ensure that Lower Boylston doesn't become a, you know, beautiful gentrified entrance into Brookline that sort of leaves the housing authority building out of the mixture? I mean, how do you make sure that, you know, this is not something where we sort of put a wall around High Street and everything else is beautiful?
Well,
or what are your thoughts on that, maybe, the question?
I think that engagement with that community would be a start. Maybe there's some folks there who would be interested in being on the committee, or maybe the committee could go and hold some meetings there. And you know, I mean, I guess I think the Gateway East is going to be changing that area already. So I don't think that there's, you know, I don't think there's anything that says that by rezoning the area that it's and encouraging development that it has to by any means you know make people feel unwanted. That it can be done in a way that encourages small local businesses, that encourages, you know, businesses that might be more apt to hire local residents. But I think primarily, I think just by inviting them into the process.
So this committee came out of, at least in part, from the Boylston Street visioning exercise, which EDAB and the planning department put on now a year and a half, maybe 2 years ago. And thinking back to some of the things that came out of that conversation, they weren't all zoning related, which leads me to ask you, what do you think the output of this committee is going to be? It feels a little bit different than other study committees where it's been, we're going to rezone. What are you envisioning as the deliverable for this group?
Right. I think that one of the differences here seems that the roadway itself, you know, being a state road, and you know, I think you walk down there right now and it's got the vocabulary is highway. I mean, it is a highway, and that's part of the challenge and sort of the hand we're dealt there in terms of the right of way. So you know, I know there was the transit study by the MPO looking at that and some recommendations. So I think looking at the zoning and how it relates to what can be done with that right of way. I mean, I think, yeah, we're dealing with a quarter. It's more of a quarter plan than perhaps, like, for example, River Road, the overlay there.
So it sounds to me that you're thinking of this more as a master planning exercise than a right zoning exercise. Is that a fair way to characterize it?
It may require that kind of, intermediary step, although there have been a lot of studies already.
30 years worth of studies.
Taking it to the next level, I guess, in terms of putting some more meat on the bones, if you will.
Okay, any other?
No, I'll just say that the walkability piece that you mentioned earlier is I think a serious challenge for that area, and not necessarily a question other than it appears that your background, everything I've heard today, seems to indicate that's something that you know we'd love your input on, especially you know, aside from massing and all that kinds of, you know, how do we actually make it so when residents who turn that corner, who live just behind, turn that corner onto Boylston Street, feel like they're still in their neighborhood and not in a highway or a corridor or that kind of thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you know, one of the I don't want to go on too long, but I think one of the big things that for me would change the feel of that street would be different lighting, pedestrian scale lighting, and that would be a start to really sort of give it more of a Main Street feel. And as other people have spoken to, you know, sort of, you know, think of it as an extension of Brookline Village.
Great. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
As I said, we'll get back to the applicants when we go through the process.
Thank you.
Whatever. Okay, next, the Brookline Village Parking Benefit Advisory Board. This is a popular committee. Liz Linder. So,
Hi there.
introduce yourself and tell us why you're interested in this committee.
Thanks for having me. Can everybody hear me? Do I need to speak up?
People watching on TV can hear you now.
So I shouldn't scream. Okay. My name is Liz Linder. I'm a resident and a business owner in Brookline Village. I've been here for somewhere between 15 and 20 years, and I'm started getting involved in town meetings, et cetera, a little, and committees around the question of what may happen in the Kent Station Street lot, and I've enjoyed the process of being part of the conversation. And Chris Dempsey reached out to ask me a question about something transportation related, and we got into a conversation about this board before the potential of being on this board before it was even a board option. And so here I am. And what interests me is it seems to be, especially since that conversation started, I'm much more aware of the congestion and the parking issues and some developments that are affecting the traffic and parking issues. And also, I'm a photographer. I love, and a design thinker, I love things that are beautiful. I love creating beautiful spaces and welcoming spaces, and I want Brookline Village, it's just got such an incredible charm to it. I want Brookline Village to thrive in its cultural aspects as well as all the development that's going in there, and I feel like being part of the parking benefits district would put me in that conversation. You know, just that last interview you had where he was talking about how much lighting affects someone's impression of a space, and, you know, the fact that an architect's interested in being on the previous committee as well. I want to bring that kind of thinking and conversation to this.
So, any questions?
I will start us off. I've had the fortune of working with Ms. Linder on the Kent Street Senior Affordable Housing Project. She is unique in that she is a resident and a business owner in this community. Can you talk about, I guess, what the difference has been to be a resident and a business owner?
Oh, well, yeah. So I came here as both, and I live on the Station Street, 31 Station Street. So when I first moved to Brookline Village, parking was a non-issue during the day for me. I could park anywhere as long as I fed the meter. And so this is not answering your question exactly, but I want to just
Well,
address
it's related
this.
to
It's related
to the charge. So
yes, and I have, you know, my business was in the South End. I brought it back into Brookline Village. I found a space literally down the street from my home, and that space fortunately has parking. I don't have overnight parking. What I've noticed since I've been here is that parking has become at times extraordinarily difficult, like maybe even more so than downtown Boston, which is, let's just say, interesting. And I'm, as a business owner, what it creates is problems attracting people sometimes if they think they can't park. Or say I have employees who now we're juggling cars, and it's, you know, I'm paying for parking externally so that I can keep them on task. And I talk to people, you know, when I'm at the hairdresser, which happens to be on my street as well. The conversation about parking and working in Brookline and running a business in Brookline and parking in Brookline is quite intertwined. And I'm not sure that, I mean, solving a parking issue is one thing, which this is not, that's not what the committee is tasked with, but thinking about parking, public parking in a different way and charging for it and putting the funds towards bettering the spaces and the, like the sort of the feel of the community does play, I think it would keep the neighborhood very attractive for certain kinds of businesses that would attract, you know, commerce that includes an office visit, a restaurant, whatever else is available. So I just want to be part of this conversation.
So talk to me a little more briefly about the way in which your design eye would relate to some of the possible things that this committee would propose. I mean, give me some ideas.
So lighting is a big thing. You know, I'm not sure what the budget would end up being, but lighting, trees or planters, wayfinding, possibly like improving signage, certain buildings, that maybe, I suppose that I don't know what the rules are, so that's something I would need to understand, but a new coat of paint can go a long way. Brookline Village is really historic. My building is historic, and we, actually, my neighbor, who I've worked with to bring our building back to its original historic look and feel. When we moved in, it looked kind of like a mix between a brownstone that's made of brick and a Greek vacation home. And now, which is wonderful, but in Brookline Village, we took the white and blue column and turned it, we turned the tones back to something that felt a little bit more traditional, and the street feels more cohesive. So, anyway, what else?
I feel like I don't have questions today, but I'll say that I think it's important to have an artist on this particular board, and particularly because I know that we're in the process of working to get Brookline Village designated as a cultural arts district.
Yes.
I think that'll be a really important part of this as well. So, I had a similar question to you about the eye, but you've answered that already. And I don't know. I think this could be that your skill set could be a really good complement to what we're putting together there.
Can I actually add something about that? Because I was asked to be on that committee, and I chose this one instead because I feel that I know the people on that committee, and we have a good dialogue going, and I show up to meetings when I can. But I'm interested in the commerce around this, and I have a pretty good business sense and a pretty good understanding of what people would be willing to pay if they're paying this much for lunch or this much for dinner or this much for a haircut. Well, where would the pain point be where I'm not going to want to pay for, say, a meter for 2 hours or 3 hours? So I think that's an important part of the conversation. How much do you really want to charge? And what is also fair for people who are, how do we think about employees of businesses who also need to park here and what they can afford? And so there's a lot of checks and balances in this, and I like that. I think I'm a pretty moderate, clear thinker when I'm armed with good information, and I can bring a lot to a dialogue. So for those reasons and that, I agree with you.
Okay, good. Okay. Any other questions? Thank you. We'll be in touch through our process
Thank you.
at some point.
Okay, great, thanks.
Thank you. Next, Amy Guabard. Introduce yourself and tell us why you want to be on this committee.
Let's see, I want to be on the committee with Liz.
Could you speak into the mic?
Sure.
Pull it
Liz,
down to your level.
Liz Linzer had told me about the committee, and I am also a longtime resident. I've lived there for 42 years in the same building. Liz lives on Station Street, and I'm also in design, and I also have a business on Station Street. I'm in furniture. I have Boston Modern Furniture. I'm a rep group there. And so I also come at it from design. I'm mostly interested in being on the committee because I would prefer to be involved in the end result of what they do with the kind of funds to beautify the town. And so I think I have a really good I worked with Liz on bringing back our building and very interested in architecture, and I work with architects and designers all over the city. And so for that reason, I'm interested in being on the committee.
Okay, any questions?
So what is your background?
My background, I have a degree in ceramics, and I've been a furniture rep and for over 20 years, so I work with architects and designers on all kinds of projects, like at the airport or Google or universities to help, furnish buildings like this one. I actually sold chairs to the library. So I work with furniture and fabric and all kinds of projects all over the city. And so that's kind of my background. And I just working with all these architects and designers, you work on city planning or big campus design, and so I just have a lot of experience with design and architecture.
So what are some of the ideas that you'd bring, other than really nice benches, that type of furniture?
I hadn't really even thought about benches, but benches
Well,
are important. But I think plantings are really important. I mean, I love going down Boylston Street, and even though they're kind of plantings and Jersey barriers, all those big black-eyed Susies and, beautiful flowers along the corridor, I love the way that between Franklin Park and the Arboretum, they sort of replanted trees and stretched that and brought it back to be like an Olmsted kind of feel and connected the, Franklin Park to the Arboretum to the Riverway. It's as much as like an all-encompassing design that things work together, like the lighting, the benches, the trees, the way things flow and work. And, there's just so much to it, like whether it's good signage or bad signage. It's, I think, important to look at the overall aspect of the entire project and think about how it can be all-encompassing and good design. That's what I'm really concerned about, because there's nothing worse than looking at something and it's like all kind of mixed together, but nobody's thought about the big picture and how everything kind of comes together to make something really work. And it's the little details and somebody looking at every aspect of it, sort of going around the clock again and again to make sure that you don't miss anything and that it really works. So that's why I'd like to be involved in it. I want to make sure that it looks really good.
Good. Any other questions?
My concern.
Okay, thank you, and we will, of course, be back in touch when we make our decisions. Okay, next, Brookline Fiscal Advisory Committee presentation. Now the fun starts. So who would, wait? Okay. Pardon?
Do we need to break? We want to set up or anything?
Maybe that's a good idea. Why don't we take a break while you set up for 5 minutes? Okay. 5-minute break.
Hey, Nancy. We're just taking a short break before SD. Okay, yeah.
Oh, so you saw we have
Slowly turning. Okay. Let's get started. Mr. Kirshner, would you like to start? But before you start, the way we're going to run this is Nancy Daly, who's a member of the committee, asked me to give her 2 or 3 minutes to not say anything at odds with the report, but to sort of state a few things that she thinks need emphasizing. And I've given her that opportunity after your presentation. Following that, the Select Board will ask questions, and then the various town committees that are interested in the issues that you're raising in the report will have an opportunity to raise questions of you also. So,
perfect. Well, thank you.
That's how we can go.
Good evening. For those of you who don't know, I'm David Kirshner. It's been my privilege to be the chairman of the Brookline Fiscal Advisory Committee, which means I got the chance to get to know all of you. And really want to say at the outset how deeply we empathize with some of the challenges that you have to grapple with as select people, members of the select board. So I would say at the outset that we've been allowed to pretty much tell it like it is, and that I think is a great credit to the select board. It's always helpful as a finance leader to know you've got, pretty much an unfettered mechanism for trying to relate what it is unbiased, apolitical as we can be. The PowerPoint presentation that we put together is going to look pretty familiar if you read the final report, and if you haven't digested all of that, I think our goal over the next 20 minutes or so is to give you a high-level view of what's in the report. We have tried to emphasize how significant the unanimity is amongst the committee. You will hear the voices of the chorus. Hopefully, as you ask questions, the BFAC team will rise and respond to them as each of us sees the need to do. But I am extremely proud of the group of people that put this together. Maybe we didn't know what we were getting ourselves into, but I think by the time we were about halfway through it, we were motivated. A lot of support from Ben and Mel as we went through this to really try to dig deeper, perhaps, than others have been able to do. So what you're about to hear is maybe even a sampler of the kinds of things we would educate a variety of people around the town about what really is financial well-being when we talk about the town of Brookline. So I'll start with a little bit of a complicated one-pager, but I think this is a little bit of the financial family portrait for Brookline on one piece of paper. And the header on the slide is, why commit to the AAA rating? And why should we improve our financial decision-making? Those are the two questions we really, I think, at the essence of the report, tried to get to. And what you'll see in the upper left-hand corner is a picture of a growing budget gap. And it's visually showing you that one of the things that we most needed to wrestle with was your charge, not to solve the budget gap, but to try to understand what was causing it and the need, the urgency with which we needed to resolve it. And if there's anything I think we wrestled with over the last month or two in terms of what it is we wanted to start with, it's the urgency with which we need to resolve this problem. This is not a new problem, but it is going to get worse, and it's serious. So in that analysis, you'll see we're currently in the budget we're working through now, fiscal 21, that the schools and the town are working through. You'll see about a $3 million shortfall. The black exceeds the green by 3. Over the course of time, sustainable expenses versus sustainable revenue, if we do nothing, what we call maintenance of effort, starts to grow that problem out to 5 million, to 6, to 7 million. And cumulatively, what you're looking at here is a significant problem in 5 years if we don't address this with a truly sustainable way. And that's really what ultimately is going on the right-hand side, the upper quadrant, number 2. The rating, and we'll do a little bit of a primer here on the bond rating and why we think it's so important. But as a matter of what the challenges are for the town at the moment with the rating, it is not any one issue. It is the fact that in the actual management, which is a reflection of the experience and talent of all of us who are managing the town, we are experiencing this structural problem. That is no question a concern as we go, and that's why it's yellow. It's the very bottom of that graph. On top of that, you'll see there's a growing debt challenge, and that's what number 3 is about. As we've gone through the planning for primarily the schools and the refurbishment of them, we've increasingly authorized debt. And you'll see as we go through the presentation how much of our budget is literally becoming debt service, which has not been the case in the past. And last but certainly not least, and this is another factor in the rating, the level of rainy day funds, what we call unassigned general fund balances, is literally the amount of money we have if something goes wrong or unexpected. It's that rainy day fund you would have at home where you just couldn't have gotten through a situation without having a little extra cash in the drawer. We see the numbers, and we've literally spent some time on Monday talking to the auditors of the town and suggested a redefinition of this. But as you can see, we're well below the levels we really should be, even sitting here now. And the replenishment strategy is discussed in the report. So all in all, the upper right-hand side is a little bit of the report card. You can see we're very strong. I'll go a little bit through the rating in a minute, but we're very strong as a question of our economy and what's called equalized valuation. In Brookline, we're very lucky. The town has an appraised equalized value of about $25 billion. And for any of us who are sort of acquainted with big numbers, that's a big number, particularly for a town that's 7 square miles and is this close to Boston. And so unlike many, many towns and cities in Massachusetts, we happen to sit on a very significant level of appreciation of our land and our homes. And that's really the question. How do we find a new equilibrium between what we know is happening and what you then have to wrestle with in terms of the financing of a lot of capital and this operating challenge in the upper left-hand corner? Let me stop there and see, if anyone wants to make a comment. Peter, do you want to add anything to that?
On the
Peter, you're going to have to go up to the microphone.
In the chart on the lower left-hand corner does not include any of the additional pending couple of hundreds, $300 million worth of additional debt for various schools that are somehow in the pipeline. If we add those $300 million, the black line would not go down anymore. So it is not the problem that it looks a little bit as if it would solve itself. It doesn't, if we want to do what we currently are talking about.
Thank you. So let me just say this. Each of the slides that we're showing you did not exist before BFAC. The data may have existed, but the portrayal of it, the analysis of it did not exist. A lot of support from the town, but most of what I think we want to talk about is how we make financial decisions differently moving forward, and that's why that second question on the first slide. This is an example of what we would describe as financial literacy at a relatively high level. And the average person in Brookline would not know much about this at the moment, but we hope over the course of the next 2 to 3 years, in order to get the town ready for a future where there's more economic cycles up and down, we understand the factors that go into the AAA rating. And if I had to say one thing about this scorecard, it does take a little bit to get to understand what's going on underneath it all, but at its fundamental level, if I had to use one word, it's about pride. There aren't very many AAA cities and towns. And emotionally, what we were looking for was one way emotionally to coalesce the entire town. That's fundamental. It was always our goal as BFAC to understand not just the quantity of the challenge, but how to galvanize the town to focus on a set of things that needed to happen in order to keep us really at the elite level, because that's where we've been, that's where we want to stay. So I want to talk a little bit about that and the idea that you would understand a little bit more about what each of these 4 boxes mean. These are so-called credit factors, and what we're talking about when we talk about the rating is like a letter grade, and it is the credit worthiness of the town that we're talking about. But if you think about who's really going to use this rating, it's an investor. It could be an investor who buys our bonds. It could be a resident of the town. It could be an elected official. But what we're saying is about 40% of the rating is in that top box. That's the tax base, the size of it, the growth of it, the composition of it. It's decidedly residential in Brookline. We all knew that coming into it. But it's very strong in terms of home values. Building permits in Brookline are a significant part of that, but as we've started to see, we're really not anywhere near what's going on in Cambridge and Boston. So part of the discussion has been, how do you use that unique strength, which is really carrying a lot of the rating, to our best advantage? What works for Brookline? What will actually matter, we believe, and we'll talk about this a little bit, is the economic development that really works for our town. The second box is actually called finances, and it's really about the reserves. That's where the question of whether the adequacy of the reserves was sufficient. And when it came down to it, we looked at the reserves the way the rating agencies do, the way S&P and Moody's do, and it's really as a percentage of revenue. Our revenue has grown a lot faster than our reserves have. We'll show you in a minute in a table just how fast it's grown. But in order to maintain a rainy day fund that's fit for the town, we need to start really focusing on the relationship between the numerator, unassigned general fund balance, which is not necessarily something that's just obvious to the lay reader, but if you know the financial statements, you'll see what that is. divided by total revenue. And we talked a lot about this with the town management staff, and I think everyone's in agreement that that is the conservative way to approach this. In the third section, just to give that a little color, that's about debt. And so the structure here really is about the amount of debt, the seduction, I call, of Proposition 2.5, exempting debt. It feels that it's much easier to get the citizenry to authorize us providing new capital through debt. But the challenge is the total amount of the debt is now so significant that when you start to look at the debt service that's spinning out of it, it's starting to reach numbers that are substantially higher than a AAA anywhere in the state or the country. So the debt piece is a little bit stressed here. You can see everything is no longer green, both in finances and both in reserves and debt. And we have a few things that are moving to pink, which is more single A. And so visually, that leaves us with the fourth box, which is where the structural deficit, this mismatch between revenue and expense, is sitting. And we're sort of estimating that at about a AA right now. We have a pretty good history of being able to correct things, and ultimately, we hope we'll leave tonight with some optimism about how to do it. But what management really is about is best practices, and that's what the report, the 18-odd recommendations are all about. We're highlighting in the report a lot of the things we learned that AAA-rated cities and towns do all over the country. Budgeting, forecasting, capital planning, and policies like reserves and debt. Those are all things that you would see in the report. They're all aimed at that fourth box. So that's one of the ways we show Wall Street and the investors that we're monitoring as a select board the frequency of how we're performing. This is something we could update at least annually and make sure that when you make big decisions, we understand how close we are to stressing the AAA. This is the replenishment and right sizing of the rainy day reserves. I won't take you through all the numbers, but you can see in the very top there's a forecast from today, 2020, right through 2025, and you can see we ultimately are looking at a town that is about a $366 million budget in 2025. So at the end of the day, what we're proposing is we go today from about an unassigned ratio, that's the unassigned general fund balance, to revenue relationship of 8.83. That ratio ultimately needs to get up at 10 by 2024, and then slightly north of that. Just showing the rating agencies our decision to move the town to much more of a policy compliant 10% relationship will do us a lot of good. It will also help the overall fund balance ratio just by the nature of how that gets computed, which includes the unassigned as well. So we're hopeful that the budget beginning in 2020 will take stock of the opportunity here to start to embellish and strengthen our reserves. So we introduced a new term in the town in what is already a pretty busy vernacular for municipal finance, and it's maybe one that is obvious to you, but we wanted to just make sure in one slide that we talked about it. So there's an interesting message here, and it's that financial improvement plans are highly targeted planning efforts to pursue high-impact opportunities to increase revenues and better manage costs. We just didn't see a tool in place, like a lot of organizations have confronted, where there's a way to quantify and document what an opportunity is before it's discussed. And I guess it's human nature, but what we knew was that whatever ideas one of you might have, or one of us might have, is often killed before you even get a chance to talk about it. There's just such a visceral, emotional response to it. And what we're saying is, what we learned, and this happened in our committee, is that if you can quantify something before people react to it, there's a much more reasonable conversation you can have. Because if you know something is worth, and I'll use the example, of Newbury College, which is one that we're currently watching. If Newbury College is quantified, we know putting it on the tax rolls was worth X million. And we know if somebody wants to do something else with another piece of that parcel, it'll be worth Y million. And without knowing any of that data, I've sat in 2 meetings myself as a resident of that area and had no idea what the financial impact was. And of course, you're going to hear the emotion. So the financial improvement plan is both technical and emotional. It has to be, in our minds, a new way in which Brookline starts to focus, given 2 things. This is a high emotion town. We all know that. This is not anywhere else in Massachusetts. It's who we are, it's what we do. And so the hope is the public understands what we're trying to do, they'll be patient with us. This happens to be the template we created. There's an Excel-based structure underneath this template. We've worked pretty closely with Mel, Melissa, and others to put some of these together. This is just an example of one that's in the fiscal 21 budget. It's about parking rates. It's obviously one we picked that's a little bit less controversial, but when we went through the analysis, you'd see that there's an opportunity summary here, and that's explained as, you know, kind of a way in layman's language to describe what the real opportunity is. It's a couple thousand parking spaces, and if we increase that, 25 cents, ultimately, if you work your way through the realization, it's $750,000. The fact that we as lay people could do that analysis as quickly as we could is proof to us that if we do the structure right, you'll be able to get the calculus for your own decisions with a lot more, we hope, effectiveness using this framework. The key implementation steps are really important because that's where we'll come up with all the ways in which we have to collect the data. And I would say data collection here, as we ultimately experienced it, was challenging, truly challenging. It's not that the data doesn't exist, but no one has any time or resources to do it. So ultimately, it's very hard, we'll talk about that in a minute, to get at the resources that you would need to pull this data. This is a pretty straightforward one. We'll look at in a few minutes at some others. But you'll see there's an annualized opportunity. So this is a particularly important point. The rate increase for the parking is actually sustainable yearly. So it's not $750 once, it's $750,000 annually. And as we grow and we experience this, obviously there'll be an impact, and we need to understand that. But the implementation of that appears to be positive as we've laid it out, here. It is questionable, how people will ultimately respond to this. Nobody wants to pay more, obviously, for anything, but spread out over 2,000 parking meters, you've got a $750,000 improvement plan result. We have about 20 of these, but I dare not show you some of them without quantifying them, because we'll just be punished. We've learned that lesson so quickly. Most of us didn't grow up in government, but it appears here to be even harder to raise opportunities without quantification. So here's one that we had some stress over. Someone described this as radioactive on the committee. We didn't think so, but it is actually quite challenging. But enhancing, the town has a pilot policy. The improvement plan idea here is to enhance it. And ultimately, the fundamental question is, it's a voluntary thing. Should we disclose it or shouldn't we? The improvement plan team that worked on this at DFAC said, let's disclose it. Let's see what happens. Could it really be worth $2.5 million? And so we actually went and looked at what Boston does. Some of us have experienced this on the other side. And not only do they disclose the amount of cash contribution, but they also show an amount of community benefit support. And I can tell you this as a former leader of some large nonprofits here in Massachusetts, that this is something we all take very seriously. Our tax exemption depends on this. And Brookline is just in the line of sight. We're just close enough to Boston that we believe that we're a shadow for a lot of that pilot support, and it doesn't all have to come in cash. So you can see what Boston does. It separates out the educational institutions. You can see how well BU does, how poorly BC does. It's not a question of whether we say judgmentally it's right or wrong. It just is what it is. But there's an expectation here that everybody supports the city or the town. Same thing with the medical institutions. You can see how that goes. And then, of course, more challenging but still relevant are the cultural institutions in Boston. All of this is displayed publicly on the website. And the idea here would be to try to quantify what the opportunity is by actually taking data we already have. It's already public. We're just not making it easy for us to all understand. This is debt. I guess of all the things that we kind of appreciated over the course of the many months we worked, and you can see this framed, and this is another example of what I'll describe as financial literacy, is that several times over the last couple, 3 years, you've authorized new debt. I've never understood, as I was voting for it, where it stood in the overall scheme of things as a question of the rating. All I knew was there had to be some capacity. There has to be some limit, but you never heard it. And so we put together these 3 frames just so you can understand what's really happened. These are the projected debt service. You can see what's authorized is actually in black. The actual debt service, when you actually issue the debt and start repaying it, is in red. And in the upper left-hand corner, there's a little bit of a lag there. The taxpayer hasn't yet seen all of what we've authorized, but you can see how that climbs. In the upper right-hand corner, you'll see ratios of debt to revenue. That's what's in black. And debt service to revenue. Again, debt service is principal and interest payments. That's your mortgage payment. The black is the total amount that you've borrowed divided by revenue. Both are looking at the size and scale of the town, and both are showing you this precipitous climb from where we've been. And then, lo and behold, you look at the very bottom, which is really a reference to where we are on the rating. And basically what you're seeing is that the town has already gone way above, or way below in this case, a AAA, to a AA, and is beginning to creep toward a single A. And so as a measure of, and this is just one measure, but as a measure of our relationship of debt to revenue, that's the black dotted line, you can see what maybe a lot of us would have loved to have seen before, all the authorization of debt, which is just how far beyond the rating have we gone. It feels as though, when we're looking at all of this, that there needs to be an understanding, and you can see here, sort of in the question of what happens to Pierce, if it's constructed a ninth school, what happens to Baker, what happens to Newbury. So what we hope we created was tools that we could use to inform the dialogue. So part of this is a discussion, we really, I think some of us felt as taxpayers, to be honest, which is the only relationship up until this point I've ever had with the town of Brookline, that this was the kind of data we wanted to see before we authorized any more debt. This is really important. So one of the hardest areas for Brookline we knew coming into this was economic development. What several of us, I'll give credit to a few of our members of our committee, decided was important was to get this message across. At this point, there are no easy choices. We knew that trying to figure out how to build new schools without economic development was going to be very, very challenging, but nobody knew just how much space we would need. So we actually did the calculations, and essentially at a 3.8% interest rate, 25-year amortization, it takes about 465,000 square feet of new development to pay $100 million worth of construction over a debt finance period. That simple choice is the choice we think the town has. It's not a question of just let's borrow more, let's just do it. It's a question of trying to help the town understand in simple terms that the economic development responsibility we all have to make sure we're diversified in how we look at our tax base, because this is commercial tax revenue we're really implying here, how important that is to do and how straightforward it is to calculate it. So it gives you some sense of the scale, and this is, this came up at our EDAB meetings. This is part of our larger conversation about economic development in the town of Brookline and how, that may have to change. And that I'll only say this, zoning is not a dirty word, although I think I got 60 seconds of airtime at the advisory committee before someone shot me down when I was trying to describe the pilot. I didn't even get here. So this is part of the experience of having lived through interacting with the various committees in the town and how little air there is to really talk through Why is this important? How's this going to get modeled out? The couple points that I think the committee wanted to make sure you saw. Underfunding promises to retirees is a habit of all cities and towns in America. You're not the exception. The challenge for Brookline is that our commitment, not just to pension, but to the health insurance and life insurance of our employees, is substantial. It's $250 million on the pension side and another $250 million on the health and life side. And you didn't do this, and we didn't do this, but we've inherited kind of a kick the can mentality. The problem is that the rating agencies look at this as just another form of debt. So as we consider how much more debt we want to put on a future generation, consider that we as current day taxpayers and future taxpayers not only have to fund the debt on the new schools, but the liabilities that are created out of retirement. So that's the bad news. The good news is that Brookline has a strategy. Not every city and town does, and we actually have been sticking to the strategy. So this is really important. Our actual starting point for the analysis here is a ranking that would put us 12th, which is just better than Newton. And for those of you who know Ruth Ann Fuller in Newton, this is probably the number one plank she had to deal with as she came in the door. We know what's going on. I think we all understand this is a major concern. I think the good news is we've recognized it, we're addressing it. We just have to keep it in the back of our mind as we take on any more liabilities. This is, again, part of the rating. So that leaves us with implementation. And we didn't want to leave a lot to chance here. We wanted to give you something very concrete. And a lot of this is straw man, but I want to just kind of give you a sense of what we tried to do. So we grouped the 18 recommendations in the report under 3 basic categories: maintaining the AAA bond rating, improving financial decision-making, and recognizing we're pushing the capabilities of the town's current governance model. So after a year, you might say, gee, that's what you came up with after 3 years? After a year, those 3 things? Well, the fundamental point is it's that simple to us, I guess. We really feel that the AAA rating has to become your flag. That is our priority, and that means we have to fix the structural challenge very quickly. And you'll see that shading is basically in the next 24 months, one of our first recommendations is that we really start to jump on that and tackle it. It's very much in the deliberations of what you're dealing with now in the 21 budget, but it'll take a lot of energy to get it right in 22 and 23. So ultimately what we did is we gave you the recommendation, we cross-referenced it to the report, that's the recommendation number. We have an entity, and usually that's a committee or someone you would delegate responsibility to, and then the ultimate responsibility. And then we block out the quarters, basically, to give you some idea how to track it. So that's the way it goes right through the next 3 or 4 slides. Just give you some idea. An early priority here is quarterly financial summits. I think we've already talked a little bit about that. I think there's uniform support for an observation that came through just today. One of our members was talking to the Urban Institute, and they said, we know this is what's happening. It just makes matters worse, though. So the issue is the fragmentation between the schools and the town, and the fact that they make decisions separately, and they're not necessarily consistent in how they're framed and organized. And so what we're saying is if we can enhance the communication between the school committee and the select board and really organize that as a quarterly event and provide you with really good data, we think we can actually take you out of harm's way, where a lot of cities and towns just can't do that. They just won't get over the problem of the school committee feeling that it has to do its own thing or the select board feeling disconnected. So we've really called that issue out in the quarterly summit. We've called it out big time in the single integration of the financial forecast, so that when the question comes up, when debt is called for, financial literacy 101, according to Mary Ellen Norman, when I took my notes when she came to see us, it was really interesting. She said, some of the questions she asked were, what is the strategic plan for the Brookline Public School campus? Meaning all the schools, not one of them, not two of them, but the whole thing. Do we have a right to know that before we authorize any more debt? How reliable are the enrollment projections? I think we all felt as citizens sitting on this committee, as residents, that we have every right to know what those projections are and whether they're reliable before we start to issue yet another $100 to $300 million worth of debt. Those are the kinds of things that I think we felt needed to be discussed more transparently, need to be understood by the town meeting, by you. And we're fairly direct, I think, and feeling strongly about that. In terms of financial decision-making, the next thing, and then I'll open this up to questions. I think our view here around prioritization is get the reserves, start to get the reserves addressed. We're not asking that to be done, not recommending that be done tomorrow, but $2 million a year for the next 4 years is what we think would make a really positive impression. We need a debt policy. We don't have a debt capacity metric, really. We have a policy. It describes how we issue debt, what we issue it, how, the mechanisms we use, but it doesn't really say at this point you should be concerned. And at some percentage of revenue, we think we should be concerned. We didn't want to make that policy recommendation in a vacuum, but we've got some specific recommendations for you to look at. Last, but certainly not least, the topic I think that it's on a lot of people's minds is how we actually think about governance. This is just a financial committee, so we can't say a lot about other things, but I think what we're beginning to worry about on your behalf is the warrant article development process, how easy it is to create one and how hard it is to evaluate them. The structure and composition of the town's advisory committee, which I think is a much bigger question than we were able to tackle, but we want to alert you to the fact that we see it. We don't know if it's a charter question. We don't know if it's a question that can be managed within an evolution of maturity for the town's finance oversight function, but it's a challenge. And last, and certainly not least, and a number of us have strong feelings about this, there's an override strategy we feel the town needs to have. And we came to the question, and Nancy, you want to speak to this question a little bit, the override, and what you think we need to do?
Okay, so Nancy, this is your 2 to 3 minutes, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Nancy Daly, I'm a town meeting member from Precinct 12, a former member of your board and a member of the BFAC committee. And I am speaking in concurrence, I'm not speaking in dissent, but I think many of the, I think the report's a very good one and great suggestions, and I hope you're able to implement a great deal of it. But what I wanted to emphasize is that even if you are able to adjust the fiscal policies and implement many of the financial management tools that you're being presented with, you're still, I think at the end of the day, going to have a multi-million-dollar gap between the revenues and the costs. And there really are only 2 ways to address that ultimately, and that is cost-cutting and raising revenue. And I think that on the cost-cutting, I would suggest strongly to you that this is the time to think about taking on some of the really difficult issues that may involve, some tough collective bargaining and say, look, we cannot continue on the path that you see through in this report. We have to address some of those issues. Similar, I'm not saying this just to the town side of the budget, I'm saying it to the school side of the budget as well, that some of these, the big cost items have to really be faced head on, I think, at this point. And as you have heard, some of our items we're suggesting, like raising the reserves and adding a few more staff positions, actually add to your problem, although, we hope good in the long run. But on the raising revenue side, I want to say that David talked about the economic development. I think everybody on the committee felt very strongly about that. And we all know from town meeting that it's people are very skeptical of new building projects in their neighborhood. So, I would suggest on that, I think that the town really needs to put together a program that they take out to the community, to neighborhood groups, to PTAs, and so on, showing some of this data and why, if you don't have economic development, your taxes go up all the more. Finally, you may get to the point of, I think, of needing an operating override. But I think that an operating override would be looked at much more favorably if you've been able to tackle some of those difficult issues before you get to that point.
Thank you.
So I wanted to just finish this up with, what I think we've hopefully found to be next steps for your consideration. So recommendation, step number 1, by March 1st, we'd like you to look at the recommended approval of resources that are, in our estimation, in collaboration with both the town and the school, critical to actually improving our financial position. It's counterintuitive that we would need resources, but I want to show you what it is that we, I think, have gleaned we may be missing. All of this is an analysis of capacity to look at better financial decision-making and ultimately better capital and operating investments. And at the moment, what we see are both a combination here of adding human resources in the form of budget and financial analyst staff, some consulting expertise, and this is something I think I found a few of us have heard about the detailed evaluation of the capital assets in the town, our buildings, our roads in particular. We seem to do a good job with parks. We just never find the money to help also grade the roads and the buildings. And so that'll cost us money in the long run. That would be what we finance folks would call shooting yourself in the foot. The deployment of more robust and modern technology, to be very honest, when I think about technology solutions, and we talked a lot about this, the parking situation in Brookline is dramatically better because of technology. I mean, our meters work, it's easy, it's modern. The scooters, the things that you're trying to do to keep modern technology moving in our direction are all great, and we applaud it. But we also know there are analytical tools that are out there that we still don't have, that we'd like to basically deploy. And part of our discussions over the last year were about decision-making technology, public engagement technology, and we are doing that with OpenGov. The town has already started down that road. We want to encourage more consideration of prioritizing those kinds of investments. Idea D is literally coming from one of our members is a very significant part of the Urban Institute. 2 of our members are Harvard faculty, and they have put us in a position of actually getting support directly from the Kennedy School's Bloomberg Center, which we've admired from afar and believe could be quite helpful. And those resources are actually on the table from some of us personally. That's how strongly we feel that the town really can't do this any longer without some outside help. We think that would give you some leverage in terms of accountability, but that recommendation is coming through pretty much unanimously across the committee now. And last, and this I think still needs some discussion, we've never had, as far as we know, although Ben seems to be, our finance lead connection, but we know all of you have that responsibility. And we're not implying that you don't have responsibility for everything. We're just interested in your considering whether one or more of you should really take the lead at this point in our evolution around financial affairs, capital planning, investment, and economic development. These are such important areas. It's very hard for all of you to get to all of the meetings that you already have obligated. And so that idea is something we just wanted to have you consider. So I think other than that, what we put in the presentation are all of the recommendations. Oh, sorry. Thank you. Thanks, yeah. So yeah, just to reinforce, our next steps include an opportunity with your support of starting to actually think about education and validation of the implementation plan. So the timetable that we talked about, we understand while you own it, ultimately, there's a lot of people in the school committee that will have something to say about the timing, and the advisory committee, we'd love to have that wrestled down and reported back to you by May 1st. On the third recommendation, which is the quarterly financial summit, which is something we observed in the report, happens today in Lexington. It works very, very well. For us, we think that that needs to ultimately start with the financial forecast, which would be for the 2022 budget. So as you finish this budget and head into the next, the financial summit would pick up some pace on a quarterly basis. And ultimately, we would see some sense that overseeing, a variety of these other meetings, and departments that you're starting to pull us together in, like the March 2nd joint meeting of a variety of committees around economic development, would be the kinds of things that would begin to become more cohesive and give us more of a strategic plan. I will say this, we were puzzled by something. We saw that the town had done a strategic plan, similar to what Cambridge has recently done, or Somerville's recently done. And it's just been a while since that strategic plan was organized. And so, not sure why, but as finance folks, we're looking for that direction. We're looking for ways to forecast out a vision for what it is the town should become. That's probably not something that hasn't happened in the past. It's just something we haven't seen in recent times and we think is really essential. This sounds tactical, but we think it's really important, and that is that the audit committee should, by April 1st, send out a request for proposal for a potentially new town audit firm. We've had the same auditors here for 20 years and the same partner for probably about half of that. And that's not consistent with the kind of objectivity and independence that we want. We further think that the statement of work, the so-called engagement letter for the audit committee, ought to include some compliance with some of the metrics that we put into our report. That shouldn't cost very much more money. It just means that the audit firm is engaged around the same metrics that we believe are so important to our rating. And last, and I think we're all almost universally in this game, we are now, as of tonight, concluding our report, but we are very interested in providing kind of a financial literacy campaign to whomever you believe would benefit from understanding, the BFAC recommendations, including the school committee, which we've already heard there's receptivity toward, the advisory committee, which is tentatively scheduled us for the 24th of February, and ultimately, and maybe most importantly, town meeting. All of the residents of Brookline, we think, are capable of understanding a good bit of what it is we're talking about, and I think have a vested stake in that. So those are our high-level recommendations, and probably at this point, unless anyone wants to make any comments, we're open to questions.
So, any board questions? Comments?
This was a lot of work, so thank you to everyone that was serving on this.
Yeah, a lot of work, some interesting ideas, some ideas that I think we're going to have to chew on and digest and see if they go well in our stomachs. But what I mean by that is some of the ideas in here, really go to the heart of what a town is and what this town is. It's going to be difficult to actually get to the point of even beginning the discussion as well as actually implementing them.
Yeah, I think, the worry is that this is not ignored. I think I'll articulate this maybe through my own lens, and I apologize for that. I think the worry is because this is so hard, it'll get ignored. It will not be viewed as something we really need to worry about, and that will be in crisis in 2 or 3 years. We're not in crisis yet, but the hope is that through your leadership and by setting the example, that will ultimately get the town galvanized around the fact that this is really an important time. If we can get a good jump on this, we think the town will be so far ahead of some of the other cities and towns in Massachusetts. Tough environment, tough choices, but it's been an honor, really, truly, a privilege for us, and most openly and in a friendly way, I would say we're all here to be helpful to you. Thank you.
So I can testify to the fact that this was a lot of work, having spent a year with this committee. I just want to verbalize that our tradition in Brookline is to focus on recommendations. And when we see a recommendation that we don't like, we throw the baby out with the bathwater. And we're going to have a healthy conversation about recommendations over hopefully the next couple of weeks and couple of months and couple of years probably. But I would encourage people to read the fact base as well. I think that's maybe the most important thing in this report, that we've collated and brought together a lot of disparate information into a single source. And you really can get a very good sense of the trajectory that the town is on, but also what its current situation is. And this is the first time, at least in recent memory, that that's been the case, perhaps maybe the first time ever in modern Brookline. So don't get overly fixated on the recommendations is my final message. Read the report in its totality and take to heart the data, the charts, and the fact base that's included in it as well.
Don't go anywhere just yet. So you actually mentioned it, this term "tough choices," and I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. Setting aside some of the other, I think it's reasonable to say if we're gonna follow these recommendations that we'll need to staff up and those kinds of things. I think will naturally come from this. But I know former Select Board Member Daley mentioned a couple of tough choices. Maybe that, in her view, are there others either from you or from the committee as a whole that you think issues that you think we need to wrestle with as a town and make some really tough choices about? That if we don't. Then maybe we can do, 15 of the 18 recommend. But if we don't do these three, we're going to be in a really tough place.
Arthur,
Arthur Siegel, grown up here my whole life, and I love this town, and I'm trying to preserve the values that our town has always represented, and the equity and the diversity and the fairness. And so these recommendations, why they come in the form of numbers and economics and finance and debt service, that's not what they're about. They're trying to deal with the quality of life in this town. And I worry for my grandchildren who will be entering the schools next year, as my children and my family and me and my whatever, that we're losing what the real values of the town have been in the past because housing is unaffordable to my kids who want to live here or to our elderly who have lived here. And so these trade-offs are going to be because of 2.5 and pension and health and benefits that fairly we have provided for our employees. We're going to have to do more economic development, if only to build. We need more housing for our elderly that have grown up here, that can't afford to live here, along transit corridors, clearly. These zoning rules, which were put in, we first asked Frederick Law Olmsted to put a plan in place, and we haven't even implemented that from 1890. We need to create more density in some areas so we can add to the housing stock so people can afford to live here. It's not our fault that the city around us, Boston, has boomed. The population in my lifetime has grown something like 200,000 people. And our population has gone from, in my lifetime, from 59,000 to 56,000 to back to 59,000, and our housing stock has barely changed. And we're going to have to do something, not because we're so special, but because everything around us has changed so dramatically, and for the good, I would say. But I don't want us to housing prices so out of sight in this town that we can't afford to have young families and our elderly live here.
So one of the recommendations or series of points you make in the report, I think is very important, and that relates to our warrant article process. We had a town meeting that went on a spending spree, and it went on that spending spree without, in my opinion, my humble opinion, without the type of preliminary evaluation and, in your view, costing out of proposals that would make that would have been necessary. So that's something that is going to be very difficult because you're stomping on the toes of a lot of people who have I guess vested interest is not really the right word, but ideas that they don't want to have ignored. So it's going to be a difficult job, but I think that's one area where we can begin to make some progress slowly but surely. I think the process by which some of the environmental warrant articles went through our sustainability person and through various working groups before it got to town meeting was a good start. I mean, it wasn't it wasn't complete, but it was a good start, and it sort of gives us a sense of how we need to try to get people to look at warrant articles as not something where a good idea is thrown on paper, but a process by which good ideas are refined and brought to the point of being realistic ideas at town meetings. So,
I don't know if I might ask Cliff Brown to just come and talk a little. A few of us are town meeting members, which dawned on me about halfway through the process because they're living this. And Cliff, I don't know if you want to just give a little voice to the debate and concern about the warrant articles. We realize it's a bylaw issue. It's a substantial question, but.
Hi. I'd first like to say that there actually, at least from the perspective of a number of us, there are a lot of things that can be done very quickly and very easily. Even the steps of setting goals such as what we want our debt to look like, a policy. Those are very concrete things that don't cost any money and essentially become aspirational, but send a message to people that some things are being taken seriously and that we're setting targets we're going to work towards. And I would encourage you to actually think about those things. So being a town meeting member and having been one for, 9 odd years, maybe longer, and also being on the advisory committee for probably close to the same amount of time, I guess my own perspective on both those two issues are, that the advisory committee, along with the select board and the school committee, all three organizations have to do a better job of actually looking at and evaluating things that come before them than we currently do. And I'm, can point the finger at myself in that respect as a member of the advisory committee of perhaps not doing certain things. I can say that about a number of people on advisory, but I think it also comes to the select board and to the school committee. I think as it relates to the warrant article process specifically, legally there's very little that we can actually do, okay, to prevent, we cannot prevent anybody from sponsoring or putting forth an article. That's state law, and that's fine, and we all understand that. We can work to try to encourage people and to have the bodies responsible for evaluating these articles do more work. So that can, go on the backs of the advisory committee if it's properly structured. It could also be folks in town meeting itself, town meeting members, who start demanding the type of analysis that should be there already. One of the recommendations we do have is to change one of the current bylaws and to require anyone who is elected for office to have to, much like we do, like we have to for the open meeting law, to actually sit down and have a lesson, a primer on municipal finance and Brookline finance in particular, once every 3 years. Shouldn't be that big a deal, but it's how we, enhance the education of people. A number of the fiscal issues that have come before town meeting in recent years have been in the form of resolutions. And resolutions are not binding. And it's ironic to me, perhaps, that everyone stands up at town meeting and says, it's just a resolution, it's not binding, so let's vote for it. And yet, it's treated as binding. They are all treated as binding. That is a problem. So we had $1.4 million worth of resolutions passed in the last year. Maybe they weren't all resolutions, but most of them were. That money does not need to be spent because they're resolutions. That is on the select board, I'm sorry to say. And while some have said, well, geez, if we don't do that, if we don't treat them as binding, then people are going to come back and do them as bylaw changes. Well, maybe they will, maybe they won't. Maybe when it's not something that is perceived as not binding, people will have a different perspective on it. So I would encourage you, and I think a number of us would encourage you, to think differently about resolutions. And that can help with the warrant article process. Because from a legal perspective, we can't stop people from, putting forth articles. Thank you.
Any other thoughts from the select board? Now, there are other town committees that are in the audience. I see Sean Jones, who would like to speak not on behalf of CTOS, but as a member of CTOS, and other members of committees who would like to speak should be ready to do so.
Can I just say one thing that I noted in the report is that that part of the charge of the committee, and correct me if I'm wrong at any point, did not include looking at spending, did not include looking at the budget as it stands per se, and so I think that certainly needs to be part of the larger conversation. I would hope you all agree is what we're spending right now, and so I think looking at sort of you were able to look at the warrant article process, and that is about spending, but there's a whole other piece of spending that we're not discussing, and I just wanted to point that out, and I think that's what Nancy was attempting to do as well, and David mentioned some things about that too. Just something that we also have to consider as we go forward is to also look at what we're spending right now. So.
And that can be a third rail.
Right. I will say,
easy.
I appreciate what David said earlier. I think we've got to at least be willing to have open conversations about these kinds of things, and nothing's going to happen without a vote here, a vote town meeting, a vote but I think we've got to. I was really disheartened to hear that you said you couldn't get through your presentation at a certain meeting because people were just so resistant to the idea that you were even talking about some of these things. We've got to at least be able to talk to each other about this, and then we'll vote it at some point.
Mr. Jones.
Thank you, Chairman Green. I'm Sean Lynn Jones, a town meeting member from Precinct 1, a member of the Committee on Town Organization and Structure, CTOS, but I'm not speaking on behalf of that committee since it hasn't had a chance to meet to consider the BVAC report. And I'm also a former chair of the Brookline Advisory Committee, which, as we all know, is the town's finance committee. I want to begin by thanking the members for their incredibly hard work, the insights they've offered, and what has become, I think, already an extremely important contribution to discussions of Brookline's fiscal condition, budget outlook, and financial policies. It's obvious that this report is the product of a lot of meetings and also a lot of thought. And we're lucky to have so many residents who are willing to commit their time to this kind of effort. And we should also remember that this committee is the latest in a series of committees that have played this kind of role for the town. At least in my memory, we had the Brookline Financial Planning Advisory Committee, FPAC, back in 1993-94. A couple of iterations of FPERC, the Fiscal Policy Review Committee, and it should be pronounced FPERC, not in any other way, even though some people mispronounce that acronym. Then we had several override study committees and, somewhat forgotten, an efficiency initiative committee back in 2008. And these are all just incredible examples of how we can get the insight and the time and the perspective of people who aren't bound up in the day-to-day business of trying to deal with the issues in the inbox. You as the select board, and certainly as a former member of the advisory committee, I know it's very hard to step back and take this kind of bigger picture look. And these committees have done an incredible job doing that. And BFAC is a very worthy successor to its predecessors and builds on some of the work that they did starting back in 1994. Now, I'm really pleased with the work of this committee because I actually went back and looked at a speech I gave regarding the budget to town meeting in May 2018, a speech I gave to the select board in March 2018 about the then proposed, not actual, operating override. And, I urged that a committee like BFAC be formed and said that it should include residents with finance and management experience from the private, public, and nonprofit sectors, veterans of similar previous committees, and former Brookline elected officials. And I said it should look at the options to address the long-term structural deficit. It should consider whether Brookline is adopting the best practices to evaluate its programs effectively, looking at the full cost of the policies it's adopted, and investing in its funds in projects that reduce future costs. Is Brookline adopting policies that increase costs without identifying funding sources? I opine that the committee should look at non-tax revenues, all the potential new ones, such as pilots. And in particular, I thought it was time to review Brookline's fiscal policies because they've worked well up until 2018, but need to be reconsidered. For example, are CIP policies meeting Brookline's capital needs? Should there be a more formal statement of how free cash is used to maintain unrestricted fund balances, pension funding, and OPEBs, retiree health care? So I don't know if you guys read all those questions again, but I can't complain about the kinds of issues you're addressing. And of course, my comments reflected some resolutions adopted by the advisory committee. But for the most part, I wrote those resolutions as well before they were adopted overwhelmingly by the advisory committee. So overall, I have to say, this is a great report in terms of the issues it's tackled. I can't complain. I've read the entire document, and it's a remarkable report in so many ways because it covers such a huge range of issues, budget as well as fiscal policy, which some of your predecessors did one or the other, but you tried to do it all and more. You offer specific recommendations, and you identify who should carry them out. And as Select Board member Ben Franklin pointed out, there's just an incredible amount of information, raw facts here. I think every town meeting member should read this report, think about it, then read it again. It's going to take a while to digest. And some of it almost went over my head, and I'm pretty well immersed in these issues. It takes a long time to assimilate, but we can't ignore it. And we're lucky that some of the recommendations are easy to implement. Changing auditors is probably a relatively simple step. As is, and it's sort of the kind of thing you hit yourself on the forehead and think, why didn't we do that before? As is adding to any operating override a certain allocation for increasing reserve funds. So we maintain that ratio between revenues and reserve funds. It's going to be a small part of any operating override, and if it's built into it, it's probably not going to be controversial. If there are controversies, they'll be about the rest of the override. But why didn't we do that? It was such a no-brainer. Maybe in the future we can have a catch-up kind of allocation to build up reserves in future operating overrides. But then there are a lot of things, as Nancy Daly pointed out, that might be a lot harder to do. The recommendation for aggressively pursuing commercial development is not new. The trouble is it's not easy. And every member of the Select Board and all their predecessors know how hard it's been. How we've made some progress. We have 2 new hotels, Cleveland Circle and Route 9 at the former Red Cab site, and another one under construction at the River Road area on Route 9 as well, the Gateway East part of Brookline. But it's never easy to get exactly the kind of development you want and to gain neighborhood support for the kinds of zoning changes that make it possible. So that's great to have it in there. Maybe it will help redouble efforts to generate that revenue, but it's not going to be easy. I think there should be a very vigorous discussion and debate of these recommendations. Would help us understand what's actually here, to recognize the trade-offs that are involved in implementing any of these policies, and to build the kind of support we need. Of course, some of these changes could be made, as the Select Board has done it in the past, by just changing the town's fiscal policies as stated in the annual financial plan, and don't necessarily require town meeting action. And I'm glad that the committee is willing to continue to meet with boards and commissions to discuss this. You're supposed to be temporary, but this could keep you busy for longer than you expect if you really are going to carry through with that discussion. I'll turn briefly to what CT-ONS is likely to take up with this report. The obvious recommendation is number 4 regarding changing the advisory committee's structure and the focus its work more clearly on financial questions. Now, as a former chair of that committee, I can attest to the trade-off that the committee faces. It has to evaluate every warrant article and make a recommendation for town meeting. At the same time, it has to, for the annual town meeting, evaluate, review every component of the budget, and then report overall on the budget. Simply doing those two things, let alone looking at the longer-term financial picture and the details of the town's fiscal health, strains the capacity of the advisory committee. Yet, I can think of numerous examples where the advisory committee, and I'm not just patting myself on the back because the other people did this, has been indispensable in transforming a warrant article. Not just editing to improve the grammar and style, but rewriting an article so it actually does what the petitioner hoped it would do. And that's true of both citizen petitioned articles and articles that come out of town departments. And sometimes that's taken, hours, not weeks of research and revisions to really create something quite different, but very valuable in the end. And it's hard to do that and pay full attention to all the financial questions as well. But CT-ONS has 3 former chairs of the advisory committee among its members, and I'm sure it will take a very deep dive into these issues and look at how the advisory committee could become even more effective. And there's some other things in the report that might be of interest to CT-ONS, such as there are almost more allusions or suggestions about how the town administrator's role might be changed, and the town administrator might be given more substantial authority in certain areas, and that would certainly fall within the purview. And we may have other issues that we raise. We'll all have to take a closer look. But I'll conclude by saying thank you again, because you've done exactly what's needed in terms of starting a discussion and offering so many concrete steps that we're going to move forward as a result of this report. So thanks again.
Yes, Mr. Siegel.
I just want to respond, Arthur Siegel again. I just want to respond that I was on that committee in 1994 to set the rules for the operating capital budgets. And I was involved in the zoning debates in 1972 through 74 in this town, and we're discussing exactly the same issues.
Okay. Ms. Brown. You're not on one of these committees, but I'll let you have your say.
And that's actually a point I wanted to make. First of all, I wanted to thank the committee for your thoughtful work. Sadly, my vision is not what it should be, because it was really hard reading that small print. And to get to the big picture, government finance is not for the faint of heart. And government finance, especially in an affluent community where people believe that there's always more, is dicey and a slippery slope. And so I appreciate the complexity of trying to balance that. that said, what I wanted to talk about was the need for more community engagement. I heard the discussion about talking with boards and commissions and, you know, those kinds of community groups and members. But, you know, there's John and Bernadette Public out there. And one of the things that I've come to learn is that if you really want to be successful at something, it's that you can get, you know, the 60 or so people on the boards and commissions to buy in. But if you don't get the, you know, 9,000 people that are going to show up and vote, then you've lost. And I look at the people that showed up tonight, and, you know, they're very, you know, diverse in, you know, I'm sure in their views about what they value. And I'm sure they would provide some real value in what they see as important, or for that matter, just how they would want the message delivered. And so I would ask and encourage you to figure out a way to hold a couple of sessions. And this is going to piggyback on one of those perhaps unfunded, poorly thought through warrant articles, which was the community engagement warrant article, but it sort of gets to the point of why it's important, and that on its face it might have looked like something that's going to cost the town, but imagine how much time you've spent if it ends up like all of the other fiscal management research that just ends up on a shelf. I personally would like to see what you've done substantially implemented. We need more money. We need strategic planning. We need outcome measures. And I doubt there is a single person in this room that will disagree with that. But if we don't have that as part of a conversation, it doesn't happen. And that's community engagement. But I digress. So I'm asking for more community engagement. In terms of the presentation itself, I would ask that if you guys could give like examples that John and Bernadette could understand, like just on the ground examples, you know, so like, you know, the DPW spends X amount repairing roads, just very simple that people can relate to. So when you're talking about a cost, or you're talking about just, I'll speed it up, Bernard. So.
I didn't say anything.
I know, but I'm looking at the clock too. I'm looking at the clock too. And lastly, I would ask that you think about a way of maintaining some focus on the social costs of government. Government is not business, and if we get too invested in a cost-benefit analysis, I come out of government, and I'll be honest with you, when we worked for people that came out of business, and they tried to apply a business model in a government setting, it took a really long time for people to understand that, you know, we were public servants, and that it's a very different model. And so I don't know if there's anybody here that comes from that background, and if there is, I'd like to see more of that language built into the body of the plan. It didn't leap out at me, but I think that's a very important message. As you know, as a resident, as a person that values that, especially as an older person, as a person of color. So I would ask that you do that. And lastly, I would encourage greater collaboration just across the board, in particular as it relates to people from diverse backgrounds. And so again, I thank you for your hard work. It was a good read. It was a good read. I'm a bit of a nerd. It was a good read, and but you heard my comments, and if you want me to put them in writing, I'm happy to do that too. So, but thank you.
Any other questions, comments?
Can I mention one quick thing?
Sure.
I was just, actually, I think that very important slide you had up there for, approximately 465,000 square feet of new real estate development to generate sufficient new tax revenues to pay the debt service of a $100 million school construction project over, et cetera, et cetera. I think to Town Meeting Member Brown's point, framing that as what that looks like. Is that Waldo Durgan? Is that the SS Pierce building? Is that so people can wrap their heads around what does that look like? And obviously not in terms of one development, but cumulatively it need to be like something that would be the equivalent of that size would help, I think, maybe lay people wrap their minds around what that is.
As the former CFO at Boston Children's, who was on the other side of Children's Place, what I love about that is that you get to see exactly what you just said. And that wasn't easy for Brookline Village, I know that, and it wasn't easy for the town. But the amount of money that's coming from that project that supports the town is a really good, vivid example of what we're talking about. We need another one or two projects of that scale to support the school, renewal that we know we desperately need. So thank you for that point.
The question is, where do you put them?
On top of the other buildings.
Not in my neighborhood.
That's the problem.
That's the problem. Yes, see, if you're going to speak, come up to the microphone.
Just for board members and for community people.
As usual, I'm flexible, so.
And I always appreciate that.
Not everyone does.
Steve Vogel, Precinct 5. This is more of a technical question. If I understood the report correctly, mentioned that we are AAA at the moment, that there are very few cities and towns that have managed that. So the question I have is, given that all these other towns haven't managed that and haven't fallen by the wayside yet, and so discuss that a bit, and also, are there circumstances where maybe it's reasonable not to be AAA for a variety of other social reasons, and how we can understand that better?
So the question is it ever okay if you're AAA not to be AAA? The answer is yeah, but it has to be strategic. It can't be because the operating disciplines that are implied in being AAA aren't being followed. That's a big difference. So consciously, one could take a position that the kind of renewal of the public schools of Brookline's campuses, as we know them, is such an imperative that we must stress the rating. That's fine, as long as the capital planning is done well, as long as we have a debt policy that makes sense, as long as we're governing the pace of all of that. What has happened, I think, unfortunately, is the AAA is about the only objective, unbiased reference we have. And that's why we're recommending it so strongly. But the answer is yes, but it really takes some discipline to understand why. And we're so close right now to being able to recover the AAA status we have. I mean, we have it still. I think we vary in opinion as to how close we are to losing it. I think we felt that the stronger the VFAC message, the better it would be for the rating. Because the view of the rating at the moment is that it really is heavily reliant on, the management of the town, the experience of the people governing it, and the value of the real estate. Those two things are so strong here still. And we invite, I think, a level of appreciation around all of that. It's just that too much debt, too little reserves, the kinds of things that we're seeing happening in the town are not the right reason to jeopardize the rating.
Sharon or Ms. Abramowitz?
Hi, my name is Sharon Abramowitz, Precinct 12. I'm a member of the school committee. I am also a member of the finance subcommittee of the school committee. I am not speaking on behalf of those bodies as we have not yet had a chance to review this document together in quorum. We will be reviewing this document in the finance subcommittee this Thursday at 4 o'clock. You're all welcome to join. And we will be taking this up in the full committee, I believe either next week or in our last meeting before the end of the month. I had not planned to speak this evening. I would like to give a few initial reactions and responses. The first thing that I would like to say is thank you very much for this extraordinary body of work. I have reviewed this carefully. I have been following this process carefully. And it is my intention as a member of the school committee, and it's just as an independent citizen, to fully endorse all 18 of the recommendations of the BFAC, report. I can call out several that are specific. I don't think that I will at this time. What I would like to do is I would like to mention 3 additional recommendations that I wish had been written, and I think I'm going to be echoing Deb Brown's comments here. I wish that recommendation 19 had involved a meaningful investment in community engagement for the purpose of aligning the priorities of community residents and voters with the strategic plans and visions of the town, so that the warrant article process is not being used to bypass other governance processes that people feel like do not represent their priorities and interests, right? At the end of the day, financing is about priorities. Priorities is about values. And I think that on the town side, we need to start closing that loop. And I think that a really important way to do that is to invest meaningfully in our community engagement infrastructure, which I've spoken about here before. For recommendation 20 on the school side, I would say that there is a similar set of processes that also need to be realized within the structure of school governance. And that has to do with revitalizing our system of school council oversight over school-based budgeting. We are experiencing a process, I believe, at the school committee level, and I'm speaking extemporaneously here, in which I think we're seeing unpredictable outcomes and unpredictable expenditures as a result of the top not being fully connected to the drivers of the educational process at the schoolhouse level, and I think that there's room where we can improve. One of the things that I most appreciate about this document is the fact that it encourages the schools and the town to see each other as not just sort of next to each other or twinned together, but as really embedded in each other, okay? And that would take me to recommendation number 21, which is to ask the town, just as the town asks the schools, to reassert its own presence in critical financial processes of school-based management. And one particular example that I can give, which I've mentioned to some of you in this audience previously, is that statutorily, in the context of collective bargaining with various unions, the select board chair or the town administrator has the prerogative of being present and participating as a member of our negotiating team. And I believe that having a town-wide vision of commitments, long-term commitments, or midterm commitments, as the report would have them, of a part of the total town budget that amounts to between, I don't know, 35 and 45% of the total town budget every year, really, really, really needs, is it more? 60, sorry. I didn't prepare. You know, I think it really, I think we need you there to talk about the challenges that the town is facing so that the schools, the town, and our unions can be working together towards a common vision. I think that that's really important. And I think that the spirit of that is sort of captured in here, and I think that there are mechanisms. The last thing that I'm going to say is that, as some of you know, I've come to some of your meetings. I've been very concerned about the BFAC process as it's moved along, particularly with regard to the question of whether or not the BFAC recommendations would respect the statutory and regulatory authority of the school committee under the Massachusetts Education Reform Act. And I am comfortable with the recommendations as they've been written, that they leave us sufficient, adequate, and appropriate autonomy for us to meet all of our regulatory oversight, goal setting, budgeting, et cetera, requirements as dictated by the Commonwealth of the State of Massachusetts. That's not a legal opinion, that's just my own opinion, but I am fully endorsing this on those grounds first and foremost. Okay, that's all.
Thank you. Yes, Mr. Toffel.
Hi, Mike Toffel, member of BFAC and town meeting member from Precinct 8, but I have a question as an individual resident. I wonder, now that you've read through our 128-page report, if you might each comment on a recommendation that you're most excited by, and then collectively, I'd like to know what are your plans for next steps in taking the report and not leaving it on the shelf. Thank you.
Well, who would like to start on that one? Yeah, Ben. He's always willing to start.
I think reimagining the town-school partnership and doing some work on it is the thing that most excites me. And that work has already begun. There's conversations going on, but this is a foundational document that really lies at the heart of the way that we construct the financial plan and run the budget. And it is opaque, it is confusing, and I think clarity and consistency is important. And I think BFAC is right to point it out, and it's something I'm excited to see brought to fruition.
Ms. Hamilton, would you like to?
Yes, I'm trying.
Or you can decline to.
Okay, so recommendation number 12, aggressively pursue new economic development. That slide that we have been referencing this evening about how much economic development would equate to a $100 million school, I think is something that we really need to start talking about in terms, because we have sat through a lot of presentations about new development, and people come out and they say it's too high, you know, it does this, it does that, we don't like it, but nobody really makes the leap that once you minimize that project, you inevitably create this cycle of we keep going to the same well every single time whenever we need additional funds. And so I'm really excited about that connection that you have made so succinctly. And hopefully I can help, get that message out there that density is not a dirty word. We need it.
So, Mr. Fernandez, what say you?
It's like, which recommendation are you? I'm also a 12. And so, I mean, of all of them there, I mean, as I read through this entire document, there wasn't a recommendation that I said, this is way off base. In fact, most of them I found myself sort of nodding my head to, saying, yep, we got to do that, or that's interesting. We should consider that, or hey, I need to learn more about that. But 12 is like Select Board Member Hamilton, is something that I've been talking about since I got here, which is the grown-up conversation about finance and development in this town. This is one, I was glad to hear, there you go, Arthur's comments to my question earlier. I mean, this is one where, I think we could do everything else, but if we don't do that, we're still going to have that structural deficit over time. And I want, for my part, and I'm sure others agree, I want to do it in a way that considers feedback from the community, that takes into account neighborhood character, all those kinds of things, and I'm all about robust community process. And at the end of it, we've got to be willing to actually start to make those choices and decisions, because otherwise we're going to end up right back where we started, which is more and more overrides and more going into the residential tax base. No one wants that. So we have to start looking at the alternative. This is, in my mind, the alternative, along with the other good recommendations that are there. So I'm excited to be part of that process, also to help move that forward in any way that I can, and to work for my part to try to engage more and more people in the process, so that we can talk to each other about difficult topics and come out on the other side better.
Ms. Heller, are you still here? Would you like to comment?
Yeah, I'm still here. I'm listening intently, and I'm looking through the report. I have a copy of it. I think it's clear we have a lot of work to do, and I'm interested in working to find the best way to implement many of these recommendations. Some of them I think are maybe a bit unrealistic. For instance, the recommendation about Norfolk County and a comment about working with the state to get us out of Norfolk County. That is a really difficult process, and we tried it at one point about, I would estimate, 10 years ago maybe, and it didn't seem to go anywhere. So, I just don't know how realistic that is. But I think we need to look at everything and examine it again, and maybe there's a path forward that we could figure out. I mean, the Norfolk County thing is one where we spend a lot of money and we get very little benefit. So I don't know, I think that we need to probably divide the recommendations into a few categories, like which can we implement fairly straightforwardly, which will we need more difficult and more thorough analysis and time to deal with, and the third is sort of what measures do we need to take at the state level to get some of these things, and Norfolk County is one of them, to get some of these things implemented. So, while I agree with the recommendation that it would be great, I do know how tough it is in that category.
Okay, I guess it's my turn. Okay, so I don't really agree with everything in your report. For example, and this is just a small example that just popped out and hit me in the face. Recommendation 6.2. In the discussion part, it talks about identify service levels in excess of statutory requirements. Another way of saying, what are we doing that are above the statutory minimums? I'm not sure that we in Brookline want to be at the statutory minimum in certain areas of our operations. So, okay, that's the bad news. The good news is I'll identify 3 recommendations I think are actionable and would be very, very helpful. I like the idea of performance management metrics. I don't think that's really anything more than putting a process of setting goals and carrying them out into maybe a graphic template or some other better way of understanding and reading and following through on them. It's not a big deal, but I think that's a good recommendation. Okay, the main thing though that I think is good in here. Recommendations 2 and 3 regarding the warrant article development, I think that's incredibly important. And the idea of these periodic summits, which we've already planned to begin with the heads of the advisory committee, school committee, and me. to begin to, number one, figure out what are the, what do we do? What are the things that we each do, and how can we do them really better? Because I think many times the school committee is a little opaque to me. And I've served on a school board, and so I know that it's not easy to sort of present some of the issues the schools are confronted with. But, those are the two things I think are most important and are easy to do. Some of your recommendations, are just, not going to be easy to do. They're going to clash with our culture in this town, which is a town, right? Town with a town meeting members who really want to get involved in the nitty-gritty of running the town. That's not very efficient, but that is, what it is. And, it's going to be difficult to sort of gingerly, walk town meeting and the town into different ways of functioning, warrant article process being sort of the obvious. So that's my comment. Now, how do we implement this, or what are the, how do you put it, next steps in terms of implementing? Well, we're going to have to digest it and come up with an agreement as to what makes sense, what is practical, and what can we begin carrying out immediately, and what really takes some preparation, seeding the ground before we can actually even begin to think about carrying them out. And there's certain things I think just not we probably won't agree with, basically. So, I mean, the reserve policy, as I understand, is something that we are beginning to address. It's going to be a while, but we're beginning that process. So, anyway, my 2 cents. Any other questions, or can we conclude this meeting?
Just a recognition that these are all volunteers that put this together, and I mean, just the tremendous, I saw 34 meetings in there, and more to come for those of you that are going to continue going on the tour and helping educate people around town about these financial realities and financial literacy, as you said, and just just a thank you from me, certainly, for all that you've done for us, and you gave us a lot to wrestle with, so thanks.
Yes, one last comment?
Sorry, I just thought of this. My name is Catherine Donaher, I'm a resident many years. I wanted, I'm enthusiastic about what you've done and how explicit you've been about our responsibilities as citizens and as elected officials. But one of the things that I think we've had a hard time doing is holding ourselves accountable. It's really hard to know who's in charge and who you can go to and say, can I get an answer to this? And if not, can you tell me how you could help me get it? And so what I'm wondering, as a postscript maybe to the meeting, is whether or not the select board can commit, as one of our accountable bodies, to put on the agenda for successive meetings at whatever pace you think is appropriate, the manner in which you want to act on these recommendations, and that you want to engage us as citizens and keep us accountable so that you can move these forward. But I think having a calendar of your own commitment to when you're going to address these and how would be a great step forward, and I would appreciate it. Thank you.
Okay. Any other comments? Seeing none, meeting will be adjourned. Thank you.